All right, folks, good morning. Good morning to all of you, and welcome on this lovely spring day, early spring, late winter. I know folks are still trickling in and settling down, so with that in mind, I will excuse the lack of response to my initial greeting, but we'll try that one more time. Good morning. Much better, absolutely. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Welcome to the 5th annual ACCEL Conference on Community Engagement in Research, or as we've come to call it, Community Research Exchange. It's a wonderful crowd out here. It reminds me last weekend I was watching the Oscars, so it kind of feels a little bit like that. So, first, of course, I have to thank the Academy, and in fact, I do have to thank the Academy. And let's see if this will work. Yes, it will. So these are the folks who made this day possible. The conference volunteers and program support, all of whom are listed on page 20 of your packet. Nicole Harrington, Holly Zerhusen, Dina Chisholm, Yamina Heyman, Mary McElwain, Elizabeth Nolan, Terry Petticone, Dave Petticone, Suzanne Perfield, and Aaron Riegel. Thank you very much. The woman whose name you've seen a lot of in your initial materials and in nagging you to get your materials in on time and get your registrations in on time, our conference manager, Jennifer Passarella. I'd like you to please give everyone a round of applause if you would. Thank you. On pages 14 to 17 of your program, you'll see the ACCEL CTR component leads and principal investigators, several of whom you'll hear from today, and the Community Advisory Council, who represents all of us and our diverse voices. I'd actually love it if the Community Advisory Council and the ACCEL program leads, in whichever capacity who you are, if you could please stand and be acknowledged. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We have folks online as well. We have some visitors who've come in from South Carolina, but we also have our colleagues from the Medical University of South Carolina online via Blue Jeans. So welcome to our colleagues from there. And I was actually downstate earlier this week, last week, at our downstate hospitals, and shared our Blue Jeans information there as well. So we expect several colleagues from downstate as well online. This year, we bring together the largest gathering so far of this community research exchange. 275 people have registered so far online, which is a good problem to have. And as I mentioned, all the ACCEL institutions and all the Delaware Health Sciences Alliance institutions and our partner networks, you've all showed up, which is wonderful. And I realize it's not for me. It's probably more for our outstanding program, but that's okay, or at least for Dr. Georgia Dunstan, and we'll hear from her a little bit later this morning. I'm going to skip ahead here to our agenda just so I can review that with you. So we will have a couple of welcoming comments to get things rolling. Then Dr. Dunstan will offer her keynote remarks. We'll go from there to our platform presentations, and we'll take a break to view the poster session outside, and then come back here for the second round of platform presentations. After that, we'll have a community panel, and up until that point, everything will be in this room. Following that, Governor Carney will offer some comments just before lunch, and at that point, we will transition to our workshop part of the agenda, which is in the afternoon. If you need information on where the workshops are held, in what rooms, that's in your packet. It's also here. It's color-coded. Jen has tried to make sure it's as straightforward as possible. And again, we thank all of you who've staffed all this work and made this possible for us. So this year, we're bringing together the themes of the last several years into health disparities, and that's what we're talking about today. So overall, Delaware, by one of the rankings I was reading recently, has gone from number 31 to number 30 overall in the country, which is not a terrific place to be. Improving, but we still have disparities. We have racial and ethnic disparities. We have differences in health status for those with and without a high school degree. And those differences are among the worst in the country, unfortunately. We have geographic disparities. How many folks here are from outside of Newcastle County, from Kent County, Sussex County, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, other places? So several of you, thank you. At least a third of you who are here outside Newcastle County. We have challenges in infant mortality, unintended pregnancy, and chronic diseases such as diabetes, which unfortunately have a geographic variation to them as well, even in our state. We also have conditions which we're developing a greater understanding of, such as the opioid epidemic and heroin overdoses, which also affect populations in disproportionate ways. But we also have tremendous assets, and if you look around, you're looking at them. People and the institutions they represent. As I mentioned, every healthcare institution, most healthcare research organizations in the state are here today represented in some form. So our biggest asset in Delaware, as always, is Delawareans. Like my friends on the Community Advisory Council, and like our social workers celebrating National Social Work Month today. I'd like you to please give them a round of applause if you would. Stuart Binder-McLeod said when he first brought forth this idea of the ACCEL grant that it was research that matters, and I think that's really important for us to remember. It does matter, and what we discussed today is all stuff that makes a difference. We have to study it, we have to apply it, and we have to scale it in all the above areas that I mentioned. So the work doesn't stop there, and we'll bring together a lot of these themes as we go through the rest of the morning. As we continue, I actually want to bring up this morning a personal friend and a colleague and somebody who's very committed to all of these areas of health disparities. Our Lieutenant Governor, Bethany Hall-Long, is a public health professional, a health advocate, and I learned this morning that she has a wonderful connection with all the ACCEL institutions. Not only is she a professor at the University of Delaware, as you all know, teaching nursing and public health, but she also has a connection through her graduate work at the Medical University of South Carolina. So we're very pleased to reunite her with some of her former colleagues. Please join me in welcoming our Lieutenant Governor, Bethany Hall-Long.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. To those here in the live audience and those who are streaming in, it is truly a pleasure to be among friends and colleagues and some older graduate classmates. Where has the time gone, Dr. Carolyn Jenkins? I'm going to pull you out. It is great to be here. As I look out, I see our Director of Public Health, Dr. Rattay. I see many familiar faces, but to Dr. Khan, for your leadership, and Dr. Stuart Binder-McLeod, who I think is the energizer who moves us all along so well here, and to the Planning Committee, all the work that you've done. And I am just so delighted today to hear from soon a fabulous speaker who's going to share with us her work with genomes and genetic research as well as with health disparities. You'll be hearing later today from our governor, but it was really important to me, not only as a nurse, as a faculty member, professor, and a scientist who conducts research with many of you in this audience, but to our students. And it's about workforce development and having the cusp for the future to make sure that we are addressing health disparities. And those who know me know that I make my mission with vulnerable populations and persons in disparate situations. And we have been able to successfully make some changes in Delaware. I look out in the audience, I see those of you who've worked with us on population issues of cancer, population issues, some around diabetes. And I know that we have a lot more work to do. And the one way that we're going to make this successful is partnerships. And this is bigger than one state. This is obviously multi-state. And I am convinced that from some of the data, the research, the translational research, rolling up your sleeves, what really matters at the doorsteps of our community members is where change is going to happen. And as you indicated earlier when Stuart mentioned about really making a difference, this is how it happens. Taking that research from bench or laboratory and community to actually to the doorstep. And we are committed in Delaware. Many of you have watched this year as we've worked hard, I know, with DSAM and DPH and Youth and Family Services to address our mental health and substance use disorder problems that we're experiencing. So from our partnerships, our great ideas, to those of you from South Carolina, who I think we're a little jealous today, I suspect it's a little warmer there, that we are excited about this. And so I wanted to give my personal greetings to tell you from the morning venue how excited we are. And you'll hear from our governor this afternoon about how important the work that we do as partners in research and taking it to the people and really impacting lives. And I am convinced we'll have model work that will affect not only the nation, but perhaps some of our international neighbors as well. So thank you for having me come and give you greetings. And I don't want to stand in the way of our morning keynote, but I believe Dr. Stuart Bender-McLeod, I am sure, wants to come forth, and it looks like Dr. Kahn probably wants to give him a shout out first. So thank you, welcome, enjoy today. Those who've come from South Carolina, I hope you enjoy our tax-free shopping. And perhaps even our coast is a little different than yours, but we hope that you enjoy your time here in Delaware, so welcome.
So Stuart Bender-McLeod shared with me that he really dislikes long introductions. So in deference to that preference, I will give him a long introduction. Actually, Stuart is no stranger to us. Dr. Stuart Bender-McLeod is the Edward Ratledge Professor of Physical Therapy and the Associate Vice Provost, now the Associate Vice President for Clinical and Translational Research at the University of Delaware. He's also the Principal Investigator for the ACCEL project, which, as you know, is Delaware's Clinical and Translational Research program. He has some thoughts to share and perhaps even some exciting news for the next 5 years of our work, or maybe after 5 years of my chairing this conference, he's about to tell me, you're fired. I don't know, we'll find out. Please join me in welcoming Stuart Bender-McLeod.
Good morning, everyone. So I want to start off, first of all, by thanking three groups. Certainly the leadership of our community engagement and outreach component, the organizing committee for this conference, as well as our CAC. Without those three groups, we simply wouldn't be here today. And I just want to give them all a round of applause and say thank you very much. I think many of you know this is the 5th conference that we've had, right? Which means we're in the 5th year of a 5-year program. That's a little scary because I think if you know how the NIH works, in order to continue any program, you need to submit a competitive renewal, and those renewals are reviewed by a panel of your peers. Their review then is handed off to NIH officials, and then funding decisions are made. Well, we are in the midst of that process right now. We submitted our competitive renewal back in October, and we were very interested in terms of every time you submit a competitive renewal, of course, the NIH reserves the right to change the rules. So in our original application, a community engagement and outreach component was not required for each of the CTRs, the clinical and translational research programs. We were one of only 2 programs that had the foresight to include community engagement and outreach as a key component activity within our clinical and translational research program. I was pleased to note that in the competitive renewal, they decided to require that for all components. So I think we were certainly blazing the trail there for others. I guess what I want to do is just share with you some good news. So we submitted this grant October 6th, and on May 6th, the scientific review panel convened and reviewed our application and all other applications. Of course, I was online and calling our program director very early in the morning on May 7th. And fortunately, by the middle of the afternoon, the score was actually published. And I just want to say that I was delighted. We scored in the outstanding range, which meant we had a very strong application. Thanks to everyone out there. With no significant weaknesses. I talked to our program officer, and if any of you have dealt with program officers at the NIH, they're always very hesitant to say anything too positive, because you never know what's going to happen. The only thing that our program officer, Dr. Garospi, started off saying, Stuart, I think you're going to be very pleased with your score. He didn't know that I had already seen it online, and I said, I am pleased. He would not make any guarantees about funding. The NIH does not have a budget, but he reiterated 4 or 5 times during the conversation that things are looking good. So I can't promise that we're going to get renewed for another 5 years, but I can just say things are looking pretty good right now. With that, I just want to welcome everyone and say I certainly look forward to another outstanding 5 years of working with everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart. I think that's exactly the right tone with which to start off our the last conference of this current cycle and look forward to the next 5 years. It's now my pleasure to welcome today's keynote speaker, Dr. Georgia Dunstan. Dr. Dunstan has been a true trailblazer in the dual complementary areas of this particular conference, which are health disparities and scientific research. She is the founding director of the National Human Genome Center and professor emeritus and former chair of microbiology at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She received her bachelor's in biology from Norfolk State, her master's from Tuskegee University, her PhD in human genetics from the University of Michigan, and completed her postdoc at the NIH in the Laboratory of Immunodiagnostics. One of her major research interests has been genetic variation on the human MHC antigen system and markers of disease susceptibility in African Americans. She built this into the foundational work on human disease susceptibility and health disparities at the National Human Genome Center. This center searches for candidate genes of conditions that affect African American groups disproportionately, and particularly conditions such as diabetes, asthma, and prostate cancer. Dr. Dunstan serves on several highly prestigious national committees at the NIH, including study sections, and as a member of the National Academy of Sciences. You may have seen her TED Talk, you may have seen her multiple YouTube outreach communications and videos. We are incredibly thrilled and honored that she agreed to join us today. Please join me in welcoming a true legend in the field, Dr. Georgia Dunstan.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for the introduction. And I want to begin congratulating all of you for the introductory remarks, which were informative for me. You are a great group. The energy in here is palpable. And it is an honor and a privilege to be the speaker, especially for this topic today. The addressing health disparities through researching the human genome. And it does combine the two. Let me just, by way of the topic, begin by saying addressing health disparities. Dr. Khan said there are many categories for health disparities. As he indicated, we have disparities in gender. We have disparities socioeconomic, deal with education levels. We have disparities geographically, rural versus urban areas. Our focus today is to look at disparities through racial and ethnic differences because the genome and the Human Genome Project really brought front and center our knowledge base and our understanding of racial and ethnic differences in health disparities. So to talk today, we want to look at health disparities through the lens of the human genome, look through the lens of racial and ethnic population differences. Disparities itself deals with differences in different population groups, differences in population group, and the question of what's the basis for the differences. Health disparities is a problem of society. Health disparities represent a social problem that's expressed at the level of communities. Health disparities are a social problem expressed at the level of the communities. And that's why this particular conference and community research exchange is so on point, both for the global context, but we're also in the period of the Olympics. So I like to say, at the community level brings it up close and personal. And each of you here today for this conference, I would say, consider yourselves a part of the community. The community is the site of action now for what the genome is teaching us about health disparities. And that's the focus of my talk. I have outlined the talk with 3 objectives shown here, and I had decided I would take off my professorial lectern platform lecture, and I would come down on the floor. I think I was told that we could activate my lapel mic here so that I could do my Oprah talk where I'm close to the people. Okay, and I have to use the same screen now that you'll be looking at. We have 3 objectives for today. First, define the relationship of human genome research to health disparities. Secondly, relate the science of the human genome to the science of health disparities. And then thirdly, describe how addressing health disparities through researching the human genome is relevant to achieving the U.S. Public Health Service goals of Healthy People 2020. And which brings us right to where we are today. I put this slide in to put the talk in what I call the global context of where we are today and how this subject relates to where we are today. We are in a new millennium called Y2K. And Y2K is a time that I like this way of placing it in time. I call Y2K the millennial of the mind. In this millennium, we will learn and better understand the mind as part of our identity in the same way that previously we have looked at the body and studied it and applied our tools and techniques. In this millennium, we're going to be understanding the mind as part of our identity. The mind expressed through the brain. And therefore, the first century of this millennium is the century of consciousness, becoming aware of being aware. That's the focus that's going to unfold in this century. Now, the first decade of this new millennium and this first century, I call the decade of discovery, because that was the beginning of new knowledge, or let's say a new phase of knowledge, of discovery. The second decade, which we are in now, I call the decade of destiny. I'm jumping a little ahead, but I'm going to give you a tease, because the genome is more about what is our potential and what is yet to be than what has been. At this stage of knowledge, we focused on ancestry with the genome, where we come from. And that's all good. And some people say you got to know where you come from in order to appreciate where you are and where you're going. But I want you to know the knowledge that's coming forth now is knowledge that in the genome about what we are yet to be. We can kind of think of the genome as looking at human development in large. Think of a childbirth. Think of a child as an individual cycle of what the whole of humankind is going through now, in the sense of growing up. You know, when a child is born, that period when they are discovering themselves, that this is my hand, and I can do things with this hand. This is my voice, and I can do things with this voice. I know that when I cry, I can bring whole groups of people to attend to me. So self-discovery of what belongs to you. It's part of that early development. And as you discover it belongs to you, you begin to learn how you can use that parts of you to get the things that you desire. So think of humankind as a whole going through a development stage. And the first stage, discovering our own self and parts of ourself. The mind is part of our identity. And in this second of this Y2K, or the third millennium, this second decade is focused on what does the genome have to tell us about what we are yet to be that's part of our inheritance that comes with the hardware. It's just a matter of the program unfolding in its fullness. Because I do believe, and this is personal, that all of us are born with a desire to know ourselves. It's part of being the makeup of being human, the curiosity about who I am and what makes me me, what distinguishes me from the next person. I believe that's part of built-in mechanism of being human. And so the discovery of who I am, that's why I say the day is a day of decision on human identity and purpose. Today is always the day, okay? So the long-range goal, if you will, for this stage of development is self-discovery. And then answering that question that's built in of not only who I am, but why I am, and why am I who I am. So it's a question of purpose. Why me? And I love that, and I put it that way because purpose is rooted in identity. And there is nothing more empowering than a sense of purpose, a reason to be. The things that we then do as part of discovering our purpose and then finding that we come equipped with everything we need to fulfill our purpose. And so that's the millennium that we're all living in. Now, how is this reflected then in the knowledge? Let me say, I said that health disparities represent a problem of society expressed at the level of the community. Allow me to say that every problem is a problem because there is a lack of information or knowledge. Therefore, to solve the problem, we need information about the nature of the subject. In our case, health. Differences is actually a tool of discovery about the subject. You need differences in whatever you're studying to study it. When everything is the same, you don't have a handle to manipulate it so you can discover it, you can understand it. So differences represent what I call a natural tool for discovery of the subject. So in our case, we can say health disparities, differences between people, is a means by which we can come to know, to fill in missing information, to get knowledge for the purpose of solving the problem on the subject. So to solve the problem of health disparities, we need differences between people groups to gather the knowledge that's needed to solve the problem. So it's like the problem sets us up for the means to solve it. See what I'm saying? So again, health disparities are a problem of society. It's a problem. Every problem is a lack of knowledge. And so we ask the question, what's the knowledge that's needed to solve the problem of health disparities? And I submit to you that 2001 is a landmark year for the first comprehensive map of the human genome. In fact, the coming of the Human Genome Project's completion was heralded in 2000. Some of you may have seen President Clinton, along with Francis Collins, who was the director at NIH of the Human Genome Project, on the front page, national news. The human genome has been sequenced, and it was published, made available to the public. 2001 was the first draft of our human genome. It was a representative draft. No one person, but representative of all persons, if you will. So 2001, I'd like to say from the perspective of researching the human genome, was the beginning of a new cycle of knowledge on the earth about life, because the genome is about life. We have focused on biological life and the physical, or the body, if you will. But Y2K will introduce us to the focus on life in a larger sense that involves the mind. And that's because the mind is an integral part of our identity, and it's expressed through the brain. So it's no coincidence that in this second decade, we have the Brain Initiative, which I don't want to jump ahead in time. Let's make sure we're all on the same page with this genome, the human genome. I like to speak of the genome as the complete set of instructions that each of us receives from each of our parents when each of us begin this cycle of biological life as a single cell. The mother's egg has a complete genome, 23 chromosomes. The father's sperm has a complete genome, 23 chromosomes. When the sperm fertilizes the egg, we begin the program with one cell with two complete sets of instructions for making and unfolding everything that each of us sees here in the fully expressed individual. How does that happen? All the genes are there, but they know when to turn on, where to turn on, how much to turn off, when to shut off. All that information is in the genome. And it's almost like a program unfolding to give the fully expressed physical, biological entity. So we want to look at what's the knowledge that comes with the genome about how to make all the parts of the body and how to put them together in working order. When we have that knowledge, then we can deal with the problems of disease, because every disease we study started from the ordering of the biology unfolding. You see? So the way we got the money for the Human Genome Project as a society was Congress appropriated $3 billion with the argument of the scientists to sequence this genome so that we could identify all of the genes and try to understand how they work and how they put this body together. And if we got this knowledge, then we could use that knowledge to repair the things that are problems and associated with disease today. So even Francis Collins, when the genome was first sequenced, was referred to as the manufacturer's handbook. You know, it's the instructions for how to fix, repair, replace all the parts of the finished product. And some have looked at it. Some called it the book of life, okay? Because it has information about life as we come to know it and express it. So for the prologue, I would say the human genome focuses us to become aware of how we define ourselves and who we say we are governs our behavior, and our behavior can be used, and it's science, good science to show that our behavior is related to the health of our body. Our behavior is also related to the integrity of our communities, and our behavior is related to the stability of our world. I personally think it's not coincident that in 2001, when we got the human genome sequenced in February, in May was when we started the National Human Genome Center at Howard University. And that center came into being because at that stage in the Human Genome Project, all of a sudden, it became the decision makers in the Genome Project, which started in 1990. It was projected to be a 15-year project to be completed in 2005. We're in 2000 when it was announced that the first draft is coming. At that part in the whole process, it was very apparently aware that Africa was not represented in the plans for the Human Genome Project. And it was because of the need to engage Africa in the resource material for the Human Genome Project that provided the opportunity for the National Human Genome Center at Howard. We were funded by the government to play a major role in recruiting people from Africa as part of resources for the genome and African Americans to address this deficiency, if you will. That becomes important because as we studied the human genome, it became abundantly aware that all of humanity is rooted in Africa. And how do you develop a genome that's missing the parents in terms of the knowledge? So this was an opportunity for us, but this role of difference and variation, I want to underscore. Well, I think it's going to be reflected in the next slide, so let me just move on. So this third millennium that we're in, beginning in 2001 with the landmark of a map of the human genome, we have, from the public health point of view, major initiatives that are moving towards now we're focused on Healthy People 2020. But let me just say, from the public health point of view, the first decade was 2010. And in 2010, the goals were to get the knowledge that's necessary to prevent disease, promote health, and eliminate health disparities. With the sequencing of the genome, the goal was we can get from this the knowledge to address Healthy People 2010, where the goals were knowledge to prevent disease, knowledge to promote health, knowledge to eliminate health disparities. And with that, the Genome Project was a major resource. And Howard University, the National Human Genome Center, was involved in the next step of having this sequence was the construction of the haplotype map, which is a resource that shows us variation among people in that reference sequence. So the project gave us a reference sequence for all humankind. It is a reference for all of us. But you cannot read or get the knowledge without understanding the language of how the genome is written. And the genome's language is in patterns of variation in the sequence. How do you get patterns so that you can read the information in the genome? You need differences in populations because different populations have different patterns in their variation as a function of their development. Just as a child, children growing up in the same household, from physics we know two people cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So even though you may have identical twins, they are still unique. And if there's something in the human makeup that wants to know who I am and why me, with all that I attribute to me, then the question becomes, what's the meaning of the differences between populations in this pattern that's true for all humans? So the HapMap project gathered individuals from the major continental groups. And this is the place where it was recognized Africa was not among the resources that had been used to generate a reference for humans, which is fine. All of us are human. So it wasn't a real problem that we didn't have Africans in generating a reference map. But you got a reference map. You can't read it unless you can understand the language of variation. So you have to have representation from all the population groups. And Africa's group in the first HapMap represented the Yoruba population from Nigeria, because one of our investigators, one of our scientists, our epidemiologist, was native of Nigeria and already had people on the ground in Africa, particular, but Nigeria, that he was working with his epidemiology studies. And so he was able to engage them in collecting resources for the HapMap project. And so the first group represented Nigerians that he was already working with to get that for the HapMap. So now we have variation, so we have to understand variation. But we want to move quickly to 2020, and now that we have the genome, we have variation, so we can read it. Then we have the BRAIN initiative that has come in the second decade. This BRAIN initiative, mapping all the neurons of the brain, understanding how the brain works. This brings us to this century of consciousness, if you will, because now we are studying the organ and how this organ, which controls and regulates all the other organs and systems of the body, how it works. And we're even, as we'll see, I have a slide on that, with the BRAIN initiative, what's the relationship between consciousness or being aware and biology? This is an active area of research, but it brings us, when we got the BRAIN initiative with the genome, it brings us to 2015 when Obama released the Precision Medicine Initiative. Now we have a knowledge base from which we can get the knowledge to understand not only population differences, but we can now look at the genome from individuals' point of view and get the information for individual health. And that's where we are, the beginning of this precision medicine, where we can diagnose disease and treat disease based on the individual's genotype. And that leads us to a phenomenal occurrence. In 2016, in fact, December, the Congress, known for being bipartisan and unable to come together on anything, this Congress passed the 21st Century Cures Act. $6 billion. $6 billion to extract the knowledge from the BRAIN initiative, from precision medicine, for the purpose of achieving healthy people 2020 rather. Let me go back here. The overarching goals for 2020, what brings all of us here today, we're engaged some kind of way. And just as the success the group has had with the grant, the 5-year grant that's ending, and I congratulate you, Mikal, for the next 5 years, because that means this group is going to be involved in addressing these, and probably with portions from that $6 billion. But yes, this is what we're after. This is the goal. We want the knowledge from the Genome Project, at all of its stages. It moved from population to individual sequence. And then we had the 1,000 genome project, where we have individual sequences that are specific for the different populations, okay? From the genome, now with the brain initiative, prepping us now for precision medicine. We are here today closing in on the goals for Healthy People 2020. Attain high quality, longer lives, free of preventable disease, disability, injury, and premature death. I call your attention to number 2, Healthy People 2020. Achieve health equity, eliminate disparities, and improve the health of all groups. To do that, we need also to create social and physical environments that promote good health for all. And fourthly, promote quality of life, healthy development, and healthy behaviors across all life stages. That's the goals for Healthy People 2020. Now, let me check my time here. Whoa. I'm on. Okay. I have until 9:15, right? Okay. All right. Because what I'm doing now is I'm going to go back and give you some of the stages of the knowledge acquisition for those, for achieving 2020, and also those initiatives for our time. Let me begin by saying we look, especially our group at Howard, we look at the genome as a living information and communication system for life in the 3rd millennium. It is an information and communication system par excellence. I tease with my colleagues in the Department of Physics that I collaborate with, because they talk to me about how physics has been used or was used to put satellites into orbit. And of course, you recognize satellites are information and communication systems. They're put into orbit, they're collecting information about from space and communicating it, okay? And so they say very proudly that the satellite is, because I made this statement to them, that the genome is the most sophisticated and it is the most exquisite information and communication system. They say, I beg to differ with you, Dr. Dunstan. We can put satellites in orbit that are nothing short of information and communication system. But I said, I got one better. The genome is living. It can reproduce itself. Which one of your satellites can reproduce itself? So I say, yes, you use AI, you use artificial intelligence and robotics, but the genome uses authentic intelligence and the human body, okay? So we're ahead of the game. We can be a model for how to make your satellites better until you got robots, but the robots still need you to fix them and what have you. But this genome comes with its own system for replication, as reflected here. Each one of us is a product of a successful genome. That makes us equal at the genome level. Each one of us carries the information for survival. And the diversity of us shows the exquisite capacity of the genome for survival in any kind of environment. Because if that were not the case, we wouldn't be here. So each one of us, from a genome perspective, has information that is critical for us to collect as we try to relate knowledge in the genome to expressions in a life that map to the genome. So the genome is about 2 main domains. It's about biology, the science of life and living systems. And the genome is about our identity. And all of the knowledge and information in the genome is coded in patterns of variation of 4 chemical building blocks for the DNA. That's the message molecule of the genome. 4 chemicals: adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. These 4 chemicals, their patterns spell out words that make proteins that are the workhorses of the body. I like this slide. There's the 2 national entities that were responsible for the Genome Project was the Department of Energy and the National Institutes of Health. And this slide is from the Department of Energy's take on the Genome Project. When the sequencing was complete, a finished sequence, genome sequence from DNA to life. That was their theme. And I want you to appreciate here, I think, yeah, there's a pointer, that within every cell you have the genome, which we started with, and the chromosomes that I showed you. And each chromosome contains DNA. The DNA has pattern of these chemicals that I told you, these 4 chemicals. And the patterns of these 4 chemicals spell out the genes and portions of the gene that code for protein that we see here. And the proteins are the molecules that work together. You see the green with the red, with the blue, seeing variation again coming together to get function. But we have these molecular machines in the cell that produce a working cell. I kind of like the fact that DOE presents this template here. Looks like a circuit board. Those that have some background there in electronics. And you can appreciate that the molecular machines working together to give you the living cell, the smallest unit of independent living, okay, the cell. But notice that cells work together, different cells work together in communities. Let me show you how this relates to unlocking the mysteries of life, the organization and complexity of life. We start here. The Genome Project is focused on the molecular machines forming the working cell. But as in life, cells work together to form higher orders of biology called tissues. And the medical-oriented people hopefully will appreciate different cells work together to give you tissues, a higher order of life. Different tissues work together to give you organs, a higher order of biological life. Different organs work together to form systems. So we have the cardiovascular system, the reticuloendothelial system, the musculoskeletal system, all made up of organs that are made up of tissues, that are made up of cells, that are made up of molecules that are coded for by the genome to give working order. Organs work together to give you systems, and then systems make up whole individuals. Each of us is a collection of systems. Now, just because the boundaries stop at the individual, that's not the boundary of the living system, because individuals are not random. We come together in families that are related. Families are not random. They are related biologically in populations, each of which represents hierarchies of biology or life. Now, if we have exquisite representation from the micro level up through the different levels up to populations, populations collectively represent the whole of humankind. What makes you think that humanity itself does not give recognition to a higher order of life? We, in our group, we call this e-life, but depending on your audience, you can interpret e-life different ways. For a scientific audience, we're talking about electronic life. We literally scale up matter to the level of the electron. And that's where we are in nanotechnology. We're looking at behavior at the atomic, subatomic, the electron are part of the subatomic. But life doesn't stop with the boundaries of science. What I mean, science can only study that which it can measure. Just because we don't have tools yet to measure it doesn't mean that life ends. Because we know below the atom, we have subatomic particles that are being discovered. Below the subatomic particles, we have energy profiles. We have living energy, if you will. And we have to get to that level in science to begin to understand how the brain works. Because the language, the brain needs pictures as its template, what you envision. The brain brings in the need for us to understand how we think as part of our biological process. Thinking can be measured in domains of the brain now, so that we can relate how we're thinking to how we are being, if you will, which is an exciting time. But I need to move swiftly so I can get through all the slides I prepared for you. This is just to show the timeline of human evolution, going back to hundreds of thousands of years ago with the first remains of humans in Africa. The oldest remains of modern humans is in Africa. Humankind moved out of Africa in waves over time, and every wave took with it its genome. So every group that came out of Africa took a portion of the variation that was in Africa. And from its movement, its migration, as we can see here, the color represents, the blue is the oldest populations, the red to the youngest populations. The oldest, the genome shows us the oldest populations out of Africa, migrating to the Far East and up to the western part, you can see, of Europe. But we see the migration of humankind and the relative age. My point is, every set that moved from one spot to another took with it its portion of human variation. And that variation was necessary to adapt to the environments that it's in. And actually the science is showing, and some of our research is really looking at the relationship between genome adaptation and the environment. But at any rate, the point is, human had an origin time. The genome clock puts oldest humans in Africa moving out to other parts of the globe, adapting to the parts that they're in, and the youngest populations in the red. Also in our local US history, we had the period of the transatlantic slave trade, where large numbers of populations from Western Africa, ports particularly, were transported over from the old world to the new world. So we call this the new world, the Americas, South America, North America. And the populations that came brought with them their genomes. And we can look also at the timeline where humankind moves from the babies, from a stage of hunter-gatherer stage, and then to an agrarian, where humans settle down on farms and start to grow their food and be in control of managing it. And we move in time to the industrial age, where we move to cities and machines doing the work. And then we move more recently to the digital age, converging on now. And you see that every period of time was shortening, such that where we are now in what we call the information age, but it's information with a purpose, keep that in mind, the purpose of solving human problems. And so we're at a point now where there's much talk about the end of this age, but it will be the beginning of a new, just like other things. Now, what I want to point out here is simply that variation is greatest in Africa, the data. The science shows, and this was one of the first maps from the haplotype looking at variation in population. And what it shows here is that when you look at Africa itself, it has 1.3 greater variation than any of the other major groups. If you have Europe, one's of 10% variation, Asia, 10%, and when you see overlap gives the largest amount. And really, we share as population much more than distinguishes us. The share part is 2.7, as seen here in the center. This represents the overlap. But individually, the amount of variation in Africa, 1.3 times greater than the other continental groups. So this is data showing the greater variation. And I put this one slide, excuse me, I put this one data slide in here to make the point of why this variation is key in the Genome Project and mapping genes. What I want to show you is that we can use technology to test the variation in individuals. Suffice it to say, here's a region of the genome. It happens to be P gene. That's not key here. I just want you to recognize any area of the genome that we look at. The map gave us points of variation. What I want you to see here is at this gene, there are at least 13 different patterns of these 4 chemicals that we use to define places in the genome. My point is, look at the different populations. When you look at African Americans, you see that the amount of variation is broad, just like in Nigeria, the types of variation that you find reflected here by the different numbers is broadest in African populations. You look at Hispanics, you look at European, you still see variation, but the spectrum of variation is not as broad as in Africa. So this is data showing the spectrum of variation. Now, this is key because we use these patterns of variation to map for genes. So it becomes important to know what is the most common variant in a particular individual or population to map for that gene in that population. In other words, for example, if we made a probe that had this sequence 1, and we used that probe to map for the P gene, in African people, at least 0.34, 35% of persons would carry that particular variant. So we could use that probe to find if that person had some problem that was associated with that P gene. However, that same pattern, if we use that pattern in Hispanics or European, only 0.1% of Hispanics carry that particular one allele. So it would not be the best pattern to use to type for that gene in Hispanics and Europeans, which have even less. But if you wanted to type for this gene in Hispanic, if you use allele 5, which has a 0.33, then that could give you the greatest power for finding that gene. And that would be true also in this case for European and Asian. My point is, we technically can develop probes to look for what gene an individual has. But what probe you use depends on knowledge about variation in that population. The importance of this was such that in 2007, on the front cover of Science, the major scientific journal, human genome genetic variation was the breakthrough of the year. Researchers came to appreciate the extent to which our genome differed from person to person and the implications of this variation for deciphering the genetics of complex diseases. This is 2010, at the end of Healthy People 2010. These are all the various kinds of biological problems that have been mapped to the genome, or to the chromosome that you see there. Moving specifically and closing in on health disparities. The genome is central. It's your central information system. It's collecting information about the clinical phenotype, which is gathered in clinical studies. We got to get the family history. We get information about history of disease, the gender, the age. Also, we have the epidemiologists and others who are gathering information about the environment for that genome has been exposed to, and that is factors about the individual's exposure to parasites, to pollutants, to drugs, alcohol, all those environmental factors. And then there are economic factors that are also being collected. But this big area here, which is the one that we close in on the community research needs at this point, cultural factors. To really understand the uniqueness of that genome, we need to better understand what are the factors that distinguish people based on their attitudes and their beliefs. And this is information that can be gathered now where we are. Attitudes and beliefs, we are finding, as I said, how we think influences our biology. I can go swiftly here. You know the disparities. This was just to set the stage for 2000 when we began the Genome Project. And the goal was to address the knowledge to get at disparities in disease, as we show here. Was a big focus. We have the Cancer Initiative, which is reflective of the disparities that we have between people in cancer, not only the disease, but death itself. The disparities research has shown us that social determinants of health are very important. The conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. These circumstances influence the genome. The social determinants of health are mostly responsible health inequities, the unfair and unavoidable differences in health status seen within and between countries. Can we map the social determinants? Now we can with the evolution of epigenomics. Epigenomics now is allowing us to look at expression of the genome in different kinds of environments. We find that the way you think, if you will, the things you drink, what have you, if you're looking at alcohol, for example, we can look at how that influences the systems of the body that can be related to disease. So epigenomics now and regulation opens this up. So a major determinant in health disparities is behavior. This is so key. What's the link between genes and behavior? How does our genotype and environment produce behavior? And what methods are available to investigate these questions? Behavior. What is behavior? How a person sees themselves in the context of their environment. And what's available for them to maintain their sense of integrity or wholeness. So access to resources influences how behavior impacts. Sequencing we can do. The Brain Initiative, as I said, I want to point out that we can look from atoms to thoughts and to behavior, linking what is known about the single cell to the complex behavior, leading us to precision medicine, where we now are at the point where we can really target effective patient-specific remedies to treat disease. I put this in the form of a cell phone. So I want you to think of this genome as a handheld information and communication that your genome can connect with every cell in your body instantaneously. We can connect to each other and we connect across the world. The genome is able to that technology. And the low-hanging fruit for precision medicine is this whole area of pharmacogenomics, where we want to be able to relate individuals to pharmaceuticals, because that's big in our economy. To do that, we need to have the prevalence of the relevant genotypes in the population, how the drugs respond among individuals, and whether or not how the environmental factors interact. So this is a big area of pharmacogenomics. The brain allows us to look at different domains of the brain and see how drugs particular of emphasis right now is opioid, the opioid dilemma. And we know that opioids affect the dopamine pathway of the brain. And the dopamine pathway has been associated with a system. One of my colleagues, who's very well known in this area, Dr. Bloom, has developed this reward deficiency syndrome, where you see here that dopamine regulation levels, the various categories in the brain of addictive disorders, where they were, Dr. Bloom and his colleague at NIH really first wanted to discover the alcohol gene, for example. But behaviors, compulsive behavior, and what we see here are different kinds of mental disorders that can be related to dopamine regulation. And I had some information on just work that we're doing with dopamine in African Americans and Hispanics in our area, where the practical aspect of this is real. We did genotyping in our population and found that in our population, this particular allele, CYP3A41B, had a higher frequency. Now, this particular variant metabolizes opioids faster, which means that the dose that you give the patient, many of the patients can metabolize and use it before it reaches effective levels. And so there's a problem with dosing. I threw this in as our biophysics because we are looking at the energy level. I like this phrase from Einstein that says, like everything, well, Einstein's statement is that the significant problems we have cannot be solved at the same level of thinking with which we created them. But I would say to you, like everything in the universe, the human genome and the biology it encodes is made of energy. And this reflects a level where our group is down the biophysics group, and we're looking at the union, the reunion at Howard of science and spirituality in human identity and population. And this is shifting the paradigm from the biochemical to the biophysical, from the molecule to energy, from the physical to the mental, from the natural to the supernatural, from the body to the soul, from translation to transformation. So while right now we have clinical translation, but translation itself is a step towards transformation and opening to new levels of life that meet classical rules, but also the whole world of the quantum, which has rules that can be followed in science. So we're moving from disease and death to health and life and living. Many opportunities, commercial promise, ethical danger, social challenge. We need the community involved. How can academic research centers, University of Delaware, and community health service providers and communities collaborate in using translational research to eliminate health disparities and optimize health equity for all of us, which is Healthy People 2020. We need education and training. We need inclusion in clinical trials. We need increased participation of all groups so that we can see the relationship between genomics and culture. We are at the intersection of African ancestry, culture, and science. And how we move from there will address solving the problems. And the last slide here brings us today to where the money is, where the research is being conducted, and that $6 billion that is already approved and is targeted towards a third to cancer research, another third to brain initiative, and another third to precision medicine, with $1 billion of this for treating drug abuse. This is where the money is, this is where the research is, this is where we need the community involved in collecting data to reach our Healthy People 2020 goals. Okay, yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Could you join me up on the stage for a couple of questions?
Okay. I was 5 minutes into my grace time, so I didn't know if I had used my
That was
questions.
terrific. Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. We do have time for a couple of questions. I wanted to highlight that Dr. Dunstan has been exceptionally generous with her time, and this afternoon one of the workshops that we're offering will be co-led by Dr. Dunstan. She'll also be part of the community panel. So we'll have plenty of time for interaction with her, both at the lunchtime, in the poster session soon to follow, as well as in the workshops and the panel. That being said, we did keep time for a couple of key questions if we have any. One of the most important things I think Dr. Dunstan mentioned was the key to moving from translation to transformation. And I think that was incredibly important. And it seems like to many of us, the promise of biological research is only just beginning to come to fruition in terms of reducing health disparities. So where the rubber hits the road, we hear a lot about what happens in the lab. And I wonder if you would offer some thoughts about the timeline by which we could, for example, actually be utilizing pharmacogenomics much more at the point of care than we currently do, perhaps, to eliminate some of these disparities. If you have any projections on the timeline for this kind of work.
I really don't know, except the funding period will impact the timeline. The fact that there's money available right now, as shown in item number 4, for the opioid dilemma, which has everybody's attention. And opioid is just really, like I said, low-hanging fruit, because we're in a society where this dilemma is man-made, okay? Because we're in a society where we don't think we should undergo pain. So pain medications and the need for pain medications, whether it's sports injuries or what, has led to prescription drugs. And it's really the consequence now of the proliferation and people dying from prescription drugs that provide an opportunity for us to look at a problem that's been in our community before prescription drugs brought it to suburbs. But the money that's available now to get at this problem of people dying from prescription drugs, I think will definitely shorten the timeline. We've had genetics of, well, suffice it to say that the money that's available to study the problem, I think, will significantly impact the timeline. And we can learn from opioids then the pharmacology of a heavy pharmaceutical medicated population.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dunstan. Please join me in thanking our keynote speaker, Dr. Georgia Dunstan, once more.
Okay, not that. Okay.
So, Dr. Dunstan is a tough act to follow, but we're going to have Dr. Pappas attempt to follow it. We're going to move to our platform presentations session for the morning, after which we'll have our poster session and break as well. Dr. Mia Pappas is Director of Clinical Research and Health Outcomes at the Christiana Care Value Institute. She is an outstanding population health researcher and epidemiologist. I'm not just saying that because we share an alma mater in graduate school and because I'm a friend of hers. She is also the Christiana Care lead for ACCEL, and she's going to help moderate our next session. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mia Pappas.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. That was amazing. I think you have all of our, you've awakened all of our sense of consciousness and have all our neurons firing, I think, this morning. So we're ready now to move from, I think the genome does allow us to have that exquisite capacity for survival. And then it's our societies that really allow us to then thrive. And we're going to hear the next 4 presentations, which will really be tackling those social problems that are expressed at the level of community. They're going to help us understand not just who we are as individuals, but who we are as a community, and then who we are and what is our collective sense of purpose in tackling these big issues that lead to some of the health disparities. They're going to focus on topics that impact not just our state, but our nation and perhaps the world. So we're going to hear this morning about substance use disorder, healthy schools, health disparities, and gun violence. In order to sort of keep us on time, I'm going to ask that we hold all questions to the end. That's okay, so we'll do our 4 presentations. Each presentation will be about 10 minutes, and then we'll have questions in the end, and then if it runs a little bit over into our poster session, I'm sure all of our presenters will be able to ask some questions, answer some questions. Okay, so first up is Alexa Meinhardt and colleagues. So Alexa is going to talk to us this morning about a program that's really a consultation for addiction services, identifying characteristics associated with substance use disorder treatment, attendance, and retention. Let's see if Alexa. Oh, is that right? Which way? Forward one more. Forward one more? Oh, wonderful.
That should do it.
All right. Just click to the left and the right. To the right. Okay. The right. All right. Awesome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexa Meinhardt, and I'm a research student intern at the Value Institute at Christiana Care.
Good morning. I'm Tanya Bracey. I'm clinical supervisor at Project Engage.
And we are thrilled to be here with you this morning discussing the work of Christiana Care's Addiction Consult Service. And to provide some framework, we will give you a little bit of background on the service, highlight some key outcomes, and then discuss community treatment, attendance, and engagement. And we have no personal or financial conflicts of interest to disclose. So the Addiction Consult Service was created out of the need to address the growing epidemic of opioid misuse and abuse, where over 15% of hospitalized patients are diagnosed with a substance use disorder. And we see this number growing every day, every month, and every year. And we're in a really unique position right now to capitalize on the hospital as a reachable moment to promote community treatments and identify high-need populations and give them the help that they need. So the consult service is led by Dr. Terry Horton, who is the Chief of Addiction Medicine in the Behavioral Health Service line at Christiana Care. And I want to touch briefly on Project Engage, which does some fantastic work in appropriately identifying, intervening, and referring for patients with substance use disorder. And it began about 10 years ago, and it serves both the Wilmington and Christiana hospitals. So the program uses engagement specialists who are themselves peers in recovery. And the engagement specialists work with the patient population. They use motivational interviewing to meet patients where they're at. And they coordinate a discharge plan with the community treatment facility, which helps facilitate a smooth and timely transition from the inpatient to the outpatient setting. And to move on to the meat of our efforts, this project is a retrospective analysis of patients admitted to Christiana Care and seen in substance use disorder consultation from November 2015 to January 2018. And the 2 main goals of this project are to first describe the patients assessed by the consult service and to understand some of the characteristics associated with them, and then to determine whether outcomes differ based on gender and to try to understand what those differences are and then maybe how we can alleviate them and really help patients where they need it. And so the outcomes of interest that we're really interested in studying are leaving against medical advice and community treatment attendance, and then some related outcomes. So to move on to demographics, there were 350 records of 299 unique patients. There was a pretty even split between males and females, a little bit more males than females. And on average, males were about 6 years older than females at 45 years compared to 39 years. And the majority of the population was white and not Hispanic or Latino. And I want to highlight some of the important patient characteristics. So first, mental health diagnosis. We found that 50% of all the patients, regardless of gender, were diagnosed with some sort of mental health illness or disorder. And this pattern was very different whether the patient was male or female. Females were diagnosed at much higher rates than males. Almost 60% of females, compared to 43% of males, had a mental health diagnosis, regardless of the diagnosis. And then for the top 3 most prevalent disorders, which were depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder, this pattern is again reflected. So we find that females were diagnosed at higher rates than males regardless. I do want to point out that these diagnoses were not mutually exclusive, so it's possible that patients present with more than one diagnosis. And then we're also interested in studying the patient's drug or drugs of choice. Again, these were not mutually exclusive. And we found that over 80% of the population used heroin, and this pattern was very consistent regardless of if the patient was male or female. We also studied patients who used crack and or cocaine and opioid pain medicines, as well as alcohol. And there was a significant difference in the use of alcohol between men and women, where nearly 20% of men cited alcohol as their drug of choice compared to 10% of women. And to touch upon some outcomes, which again were leaving against medical advice and community treatment, so we found that 20% of females compared to 13% of males left against medical advice. And while this result wasn't statistically significant, it's certainly clinically significant. Females are leaving at almost twice the rate as males, and we really want to understand what's driving these differences in leaving against medical advice. And then in terms of community treatment, the options that were presented, so the patient could accept community treatment, they could say no or not interested, they may have already been in treatment, or they could transfer to another facility. And so we found that over 60% of patients did accept community treatment. And this is a really great number. It's very consistent, if not even a little bit better than with what's observed in the literature and what's been observed in similar settings. So 64% of this population, so 190 patients in total, did accept community treatment. And then we were interested in seeing, okay, so how many of these patients actually attended their first visit? And so of those 190, 69%, which is 69% of the patients did attend their first visit, with a little bit of difference between males and females. And so while females did leave against medical advice at much higher rates than males, we found that it was pretty consistent for someone to attend their first visit if they had accepted it. And then following with that, we also wanted to look at if patients were still attending at 30 days, so 1 month into it, and we found that over half of this population was still attending. And so we're really happy with these numbers, and so we are doing a good job at retaining them. Now we just want to see maybe how we can get them to go and to avoid having them leave against medical advice.
So post-discharge, when a patient is ready to discharge from the hospital, there's some characteristics that follow after they've been inducted on MAT. There's usually like a reduction or withdrawal or elimination of all withdrawal symptoms. There's a blocking effect of the illicit opioids and reduction of cravings, but there's also a feeling of vulnerability, which makes it extremely important to streamline the process to access treatment for that patient and capitalize on that reachable moment. There are some things that are done that kind of assist in this process, which include the collaborating effects of the doctors, the patient, and the community treatment as a whole together, as well as addressing the barriers such as transportation and the guarantee by the community treatment provider of same-day or next-day dosing. Some of our future efforts fall around the warm handoff. And the warm handoff, in essence, makes it safer for the patient to be involved in treatment after they leave the hospital. Some of those will be the creation of a community engagement specialist who will meet that person at the hospital, talk with them, develop an alliance with them, and then take them on to the treatment site in the community, as well as telemed devices, which allows the person, while they're in the hospital, to have a virtual introduction with the doctor. Let me see, is it this one? Okay. So best practices, of course, is clear communication between the hospital and the providers. This decreases the chances of disengagement in treatment, leaving against AMA, and relapse for the patient. The hospital is that reachable moment because while the patient is there, they're able to make much clearer treatment decisions for themselves because they have some active involvement from the hospital staff and the clinical staff as well. We want to focus in on the motivators for change as opposed to just change for the sake of readiness, because readiness actually changes depending on the environmental circumstance.
And so just to wrap up, we did find that gender-based differences are really critical and will help us provide insight to specific subgroups of patients who would benefit from specific interventions. And our heroin-using medical service patients who were seen by the consult service actually had very high rates of transition to community treatment. So we're doing a pretty good job at capturing and referring these patients. But we obviously, as Tanya and I have both said, want to capitalize on the hospital as a reachable moment. We have high rates of treatment attendance. We want to continue this momentum and really try to help everyone who needs that help. And moving forward, we're going to continue this work and investigate additional outcomes, such as hospital readmissions at 90 days. So what's going on with this population at 3 months post-discharge. We would also like to link this data with the opioid overdose fatalities from the Delaware Medical Examiner's Unit and see what trends might come out of that and any specific insights. And then we'll continue to do this analysis as we enroll more patients and try to really understand what's going on. And we'll continue to explore gender-specific measures in order to improve hospital retention and then facilitate the transition to community treatment. And thank you to everyone who was involved and supported this project. Thanks.
I think that's an example of that knowledge that we're building here to deal with an issue like substance abuse. Part of, I think, what we're doing as a community, at least from an educator's perspective, is building a community of researchers and a generation of researchers. And I'm actually pretty excited because both Alexa Meinhardt and our next speaker, Nicole Schlesinger, were students of mine while I was at the University of Delaware. So Nicole is now going to speak with her team on moving to looking at healthy schools and provider and parent reactions to changing in the nutritional quality of food served in child care settings in Delaware using a mixed methodology.
There's absolutely no visible clock in this room, so this is going to be great. Good morning, I'm Laura Lissard. I'm a faculty member here at the University of Delaware in Behavioral Health and Nutrition.
Hi everyone, my name is, Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Schlesinger, and I am a second year master's student in the health promotion program, getting my master's degree in the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition.
And Nicole and I are going to kind of tag team our project here, and we're going to talk to you, here's a little bit of an overview of our presentation, briefly about the sort of topical area that this work is in, nutrition in childcare settings. We'll talk about our methods, and then we'll both share some of our preliminary results from our work. So just briefly, in case you haven't had occasion to interact with the childcare system, I'm getting ready to interact with the childcare system myself. So if you don't have young children or haven't interacted with it, childcare participation is very common in the United States. These are national data showing that this is all children less than 5 years of age. So before they're entering school, you can see there that over 70% are in a regular care arrangement with someone that is not their parent. And of these kids, a lot of them are being served in childcare centers. Those are like little schools for little people. And so the childcare environment is becoming more and more important as a setting to look at public health, health promotion, and the focus of our work, which is nutrition. So within childcare settings, there's a federal program called the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP. And CACFP provides funding for childcare providers to provide healthy meals to children from low-income families. So it's run out of the United States Department of Agriculture, similar to the way the school lunch program is run for older kids. So CACFP has rules about the kinds of food and the quantities of food that are served in these settings. They call it a meal pattern. So when this program started in the late 60s, they had a meal pattern, and they hadn't touched it since they started the program in 1968 until last fall, October 1st, when changes were made to the meal pattern for CACFP for really the first time. So that's 50 years, right? If you can do that math quickly in your head. And there are a number of changes that were made to the meal pattern to improve the dietary quality of the food that's served in these settings and align it with our knowledge of child nutrition, the dietary guidelines for Americans. So for example, the meals are now serving a wider variety of vegetables and fruits. You can see in the circle there. The old meal pattern for lunch, for example, they could serve either a fruit or a vegetable. I'll let you guess which one they chose more often. And now they have to serve a fruit and a vegetable every day for every child that's served through this program. So this is a big change. And it was really important. The field is really interested in studying this change. We're really interested in studying this change. Our collaborators from the Department of Education, of which one is here, and I'll mention her by name later, are also interested in understanding this change because they haven't made many changes. So this work that we're talking about really focuses on parents, focuses on how providers felt parents would react to this change, how they told parents about it, and what parent reactions have been since October when it went into place. So this is a mixed method study, as Mia mentioned. So we mixed our methods. We did multiple methods. We did a survey and a series of interviews. So the first thing, which we could not have done without our community partner, is that we surveyed all providers in the state of Delaware that participate in CACFP. And the only way we could do that is by our collaboration, them letting us stand in front of a room not unlike this one, full of CACFP providers and hand out a survey at their required annual training back in September. We asked the providers, again, this was before the changes, what do you think parent reaction is going to be? Are you worried about that? How are you worried about communicating the changes? Then from the 154, we put together a small cohort of 7, and we bother them every month via phone, and we've been bothering them every month since the changes went into effect, and we interview them and we ask them how it's going. How's it going with the meal pattern? How's it going with parents? And how kind of feedback are you getting from parents? So we take our surveys, we entered them in to a spreadsheet, and I'll show you some frequencies. Nicole's going to talk about some of the results from our interviews, but we record our interviews and looked at them for common themes. Well, that got a little bit out of skew. So these are some of our results from our surveys. I'm going to clean it up a little bit, make it easier to look at. So this was before the changes went into effect, and you can see a pretty small percent, less than 13% of the providers disagreed in some way that parents would support it. So they were thinking that parents would be supporters of the change at the time before it went into effect, and a little bit of a larger number, 21%, were concerned about giving information to parents about the guidelines.
So what did we find with these preliminary interviews? So I'll have some direct quotes that I share on the next slide, but in total, a lot of the providers didn't directly communicate these changes to parents. Many of the centers were actually already following, for example, this fruit and vegetable component. So when the menus were distributed each month to these parents, they didn't actually notice some of the changes. It seemed as if it was like any other month. So there was no requirement in terms of directly sharing that information. Many of the administrative staff for the centers left the option to the teachers to communicate that to the parents. So there was little feedback in terms of noticing some of the changes. Okay, so some interesting direct quotes that we found were related to 2 topics. So the first one being that really encompasses what we found in terms of the types of foods that were noticed to be brought in from beginning to after the changes. So I'll just give you a minute to read that on your own. And the second topic encompasses the child willingness to actually try new foods. So give you a second to read that as well. So we do notice some changes in terms of the children after the changes. So in conclusion, this quote that I'll have you read again kind of encompasses that the providers were not overly concerned with parent reaction. So I'll give you a moment to read that. Which I think directly summarizes how we found that. So there was also limited communication with providers and parents around the changes. And then, as we saw in the previous slide with our direct quotes, we did also see some positive impacts with the children for the willingness to try new foods, as well as the types of foods that were brought in.
Great, thanks. So sort of bottom line, some people were concerned ahead, and so far, 4.5 months in, there really haven't been any complaints. And we dig on these complaints. Are you sure none of the parents have complained about the food? And really, these providers who represent, we chose the 7 purposefully. We chose people who were kind of complainers and thought it was going to be a problem, and we've followed them up. And we need to pull our favorite quote, which is someone from January said something like, "I thought it was going to be a big deal, but it's really not." And so what kids are seeing is a healthier diet at the end. So as I already said, we could not do this work without our collaborators at the Delaware Department of Education. So Ruth is here with us today. Thank you for being here and coming up from Dover, and Amy Beam, who works on her team, and my 2 undergrads who are in the back there, who can wave their arms around, who do interviews as part of our team. So thanks.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to hear from Dr. Sims-Mortada. Dr. Sims-Mortada is actually focusing on breast cancer and eliminating health disparities in breast cancer through community engagement.
So I am the representative chosen to give this talk, but some of our other members are here, and this is truly a group effort. So Nora Katorkis, Pat Swanson, Heather Bittner-Fagan, who was here somewhere. Please feel free to find them after, and you can ask them questions as well. So I'd like to thank Dr. Dunstan for setting up my talk so well, talking about the importance of participation in genomics and the human genome and how that affects precision medicine that we use for treatment of cancer. So this is our breast cancer research program. It's a multidisciplinary team made up of clinicians and scientists from the University of Delaware, Helen F. Graham Cancer Center, and the Wistar Institute. And we have a wide range, as you can see, of different disciplines involved in this group. And so what I want to talk to you today is about how we added the community to our research team. So one of the first things we did as a group, in our breast cancer research group, is to look at the breast cancer landscape in Delaware and determine where we should focus our efforts. And one of the things that we found is that Delaware is among the states with the highest incidence of an aggressive form of breast cancer called triple-negative breast cancer. And in fact, one study ranked us as the top state with the highest incidence. So triple-negative breast cancer is a very aggressive breast cancer. It more often affects younger women, and there's no current good treatment for it. We have no targeted therapy for triple-negative breast cancer, so patients are treated with chemotherapy, which doesn't really work very well, and it also leaves them with a lot of toxicity. The other thing that we found was that there's a health disparity in breast cancer. So this is true for Delaware and also nationally, that mortality is higher in African Americans than Caucasians. And this is thought to be due in part to some socioeconomic factors, but it's also thought to be due, when you control for these factors, to the biology of the tumors themselves. And this is concerning because there's data showing that incidence in African Americans is increasing in breast cancer. So breast cancer has been going down in incidence for Caucasians, and now it's coming up for African Americans. And we really don't understand why. And African Americans, as I said, their biology of their breast cancers may be different. And we find that they are more likely to have triple-negative breast cancer. These are data from our cancer center showing that our Caucasian patients have about 12% of the patients that come in with breast cancer have triple-negative breast cancer. And this is about the average for the United States. But we find triple-negative breast cancer in almost a third of our African-American patients. And so this is really a problem for African Americans within the state of Delaware. So We know that hereditary mutations are common in triple-negative breast cancer. About 10 to 15% of patients with triple-negative breast cancer actually carry a heritable mutation. But studies have shown that in African Americans that this might actually be a higher percentage. Up to 25% of African Americans with triple-negative breast cancer may have a known heritable mutation. And there may be even more with mutations that we really just don't know about. And we also know that there are high rates of triple-negative breast cancer in West African populations, which are the descendants of African Americans. And so therefore, we're thinking that there's a genetic link. And there are some people studying the genetic links between Africans and African Americans with regard to triple-negative breast cancer. But there's a major problem with this, and that is we just really don't have the samples to study this. This is a paper, it's a meta-analysis of all the genome-wide association studies published in the journal Nature, I believe, 2016. And it showed that of all the studies that we have, only 2% of the samples in these studies, 35 million samples, actually come from African Americans. So this is very important when you talk about precision medicine, right? When we're using the genomic sequence to find targeted therapies to treat disease. And if those samples aren't there, they're not going to be in our studies, and we're not going to find medications to treat them. Another way you can think about genetics is that it's very important for prevention of breast cancer. We talk about genetic testing, genetic counseling to find these heritable mutations before you actually develop the cancer, and there are things that we can do to then prevent the cancer. Well, when we look at our data in the state of Delaware about participation in genetic counseling and genetic testing, we find that 63% of our patients under 60 who are eligible, that means their insurance will pay for it, about 63% of these patients are African American. But yet, African Americans represent less than 15% of our patients who come in for genetic testing. And this is also important when we go back to think about variations in the genome. We know that, as Dr. Johnson has said, there are these variations between different groups. And some of these variations we pick up when we're sequencing the genes. But we don't know if they really lead to cancer risk or not, so they all go into a database, and then they're reclassified over time. And so if you have one of these, what we call variants of unknown significance, you will be followed. And again, some of these variants can be reclassified because now we have enough people in the database that had breast cancer, so we know that these are a risk factor, or we're not seeing anybody with these variants developing breast cancer, and so you can just rule them out. They're a normal variant. But African Americans aren't participating, so we really don't have their sequences. We don't have enough patients to follow them to know if these variants really mean anything or not. So we know that Delaware is a state that has a high incidence of triple-negative breast cancer and aggressive breast cancer. This is affecting African Americans. We need to find new therapies for it, but African Americans aren't participating in our research. And one of the ways we can prevent it is through genetic testing, but African Americans aren't participating in genetic testing. So what are we going to do about this? Well, we decided as the Breast Cancer Research Program that we needed to bring the community into this. And so we started to look around for a partner to partner with, and we couldn't find one. We found several groups that actually brought something unique to the table. And so we decided that instead of partnering with one organization, that we would bring together our own research advisory group. So this group was founded with members from the Delaware Breast Cancer Coalition, the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, which is an African American sorority, the American Cancer Society, and members from Christiana Care, because we also wanted to involve medical professionals who were outside our walls at the Cancer Center, namely family practice physicians who have kind of the go-between between the community and when they come in for cancer. So we started with our original group, 15 founding members that were breast cancer survivors, members of the medical community, and members of the African American community. And I have to say, as a translational researcher, I'm an immunologist by training. This was really foreign ground for me. We had our first meeting in October of 2016, and after the meeting, I was kind of thinking, I don't know where this is going to go. But I knew that the women that had attended that meeting were very enthusiastic about this topic. And so we began to set our goals with the next meetings, and what we decided on that the first step for what we call the CRAB, Community Research Advisory Board, was going to be dissemination of information about triple-negative breast cancer and genetic counseling and just breast cancer prevention in general, because our advisory board felt that the African American community in Delaware didn't really understand that there are different types of breast cancer, that triple-negative breast cancer was a problem, and how genetic counseling and testing might actually affect the care of those with breast cancer. And so, of course, underlying all of this dissemination of information is my aim of increasing participation of African Americans in genetic counseling and genetic research. So the first thing that we decided to do is to develop a toolkit for triple-negative breast cancer to disseminate this information. So this is made up of a presentation that's meant to be given by community members to the community at various events. And so for this presentation, we developed a training program where we actually train members of the community to give the presentation. They're provided speaker notes, answers to frequently asked questions, and we're also trying to develop a video of the presentation that can then be shown at different events. And we also give supplemental information about the different types of breast cancer and genetic counseling, what it is, how you can get it if you think that you're at risk, and how do you even determine if you need it or not. So our breast cancer research program began to develop a presentation from our clinicians and scientists of information that we thought the community should have. And as you can see, it's very fact-dense, a lot of text, a lot of information. We then turned this over to our Community Research Advisory Board, and they completely threw everything out the window and came up with this very good, community-friendly presentation that's a storytelling presentation. And this is told from the perspective of a young African-American woman named Brenda, and her name is very important. I'll tell you why in just a little bit. So Brenda has just been diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer. And so the presentation then is seen through Brenda's eyes, the questions that she might have, having just learned that she has triple-negative breast cancer. You know, what is it? I've never heard of it. Is it common? How does it happen? If it's genetic, is my family at risk? And what can I do about it? And then at the end, when you ask, what is the most important thing to remember? She says, remember her name. And the name Brenda is actually an acronym for the ways that you can prevent breast cancer in general, and in particular triple-negative breast cancer. Easy things like breastfeed, reduce consumption of alcohol and sugary beverages, exercise, nutritious foods, do not smoke, achieve a healthy body weight. So we piloted this presentation at 2 different community groups, about 70 members between the 2 events, 70 community members. We got really positive feedback. We gave out a pre and post test, and we found out that people who had seen this presentation actually did learn something about triple-negative breast cancer. One of the things that we found that for breast cancer survivors or people who were treated or undergoing treatment for triple-negative breast cancer, that we really need to prepare our community members giving the talk to be very sensitive to these patients when we're talking about survival and different things about triple-negative breast cancer. So from these 2 events, we recruited about 15 more volunteers who want to go out and give this talk, either give the talk in their community or help set us up with their community organizations to give this talk. So our next step is really to complete the Train the Trainer session, to integrate the toolkit into community events, and to continue to collect feedback and identify potential barriers. And I think now we have that relationship with the community that's now going to allow us to ask more research questions, so then we can begin to develop research projects so that we can actually solve the problems and understand why we have such a high incidence of triple-negative breast cancer, and actually allow us to find ways that we can actually prevent and treat this aggressive form of cancer. So the conclusion is really that the involvement of the stakeholders, the community, really changed the way that we disseminated the information. And again, as I said, having now built these community relationships, we can actually carry that farther into our research program. So I'd like to thank our CRAB members, particularly Dr. Mario Savoy, who's a family practitioner who was at Christiana Care, but now she has moved, I believe, to Temple, but she's still part of our program. And Nicole Surratt, who was one of our community members who actually gave the pilot presentation. And a big thanks to all of our breast cancer research program members as well as our community members.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think Brenda really sort of demonstrates the power of that community-engaged approach to research. That was awesome. Our final talk today is by Daryl Chambers and Dr. Sandra Menia. We're going to move to a program that has been developed to deal with the gun violence issue in our community. Dr. Menia? Daryl, thanks.
Jennifer's loading them now.
Okay.
I apologize, my slides are a little delayed. Hello, my name is Sandra Medania. I'm a trauma surgeon at Christiana Hospital, which is the state's only level 1 trauma center that cares for both children and adults. And
hello, my name is Daryl Chambers. I'm on staff here at the Center for Drug and Health Studies, University of Delaware. I'm also a community member.
thank you. And we're developing the Wilmington Under Pressure, which is an innovative Stop the Bleed program using PAR methodology. How many in the room have heard of Stop the Bleed? Great, great. So on December 14th, 2012, the paradigm shift in the country started when children ages 6 to 7 were gunned down at Sandy Hook. There was an immediate call to action, specifically led by a trauma surgeon in Hartford, Connecticut, to identify ways in which people could survive bleeding and penetrating injuries. How could we get from the patient to the trauma center in a more seamless fashion? So the Hartford Consensus was created. It came out April 2013, so only about 4 months after Sandy Hook. Talk about turnaround. And the goal was to enhance survivability from intentional mass casualties and active shooter events. It was sponsored by it was headed by the American College of Surgeons and other organizations like the National Security Council, a lot of research on the US military, like how exactly to stop bleeding. Unfortunately, we've gathered that information from our wars in Afghanistan. Also, the FBI was involved, and the government and non-governmental emergency medical response organizations. Who's missing from there? The community is missing from there. Specifically, what they were trying to do was move from the hot red zone to a green zone. I don't know if that doesn't translate up there, green. I'm sorry for my colors aren't up there. The threat suppression is really how do you stop the shooter? So that would involve police, SWAT teams, tactical combat training in EMS. How do you shorten the yellow zone, which is the warm zone? How do you obtain hemorrhage control? How do you get the patient rapidly extricated into a safe environment? And then how do you get them to definitive care, like a level 1 trauma center? And what came out of the Boston bombings was the important role that the immediate responder played. And that happened in April 2013. And shortly thereafter, the Hartford Consensus, which is actually comprised of 4 different components, included in there the importance of the immediate responder and started to include the education of if you see something, do something. And what can I do? I can place a tourniquet, I can put pressure on a wound, and I can pack a wound. Easy peasy. Let's just make bleeding control accessible. Let's make this as commonplace as an AED in the shopping mall or in an airport. It'd be unconscionable that somebody would drop in a hospital, in an airport, and you wouldn't know where the AED is. Everyone knows where that is. And so now the reality in the United States is that we need to know where the bleeding control kit is. And if we don't know where it is, we improvise. How do we improvise? We train. Oh, my friends. I'm sorry, but that happens when I don't send them in advance, and I apologize. Thank you, Jennifer Passarella. So this was written in the Hartford Consensus. The purpose of this document is to promote local, state, and national policies to combat this, quote, uncommon practice, which is not uncommon in the United States. So we don't need to wait for mass casualties to occur. Every day, 314 people are shot, and of these shootings, 41 are children 18 and under. Obviously, in Wilmington, we have a problem where our population is 72,000 people, and per capita, we are the largest, we're the highest crime for the amount of small city that we are. So we're 72,000, but our crime rate is phenomenal. It's astronomical. We're called Murder Town USA by Newsweek. And USA Today, I apologize for my slides, I really do. The USA Today had this to say in September 8th, 2017, whereby teens were injured or killed by gun violence annually. The greatest amount is seen in Wilmington, Delaware, for a small city like ours. I don't need to show you statistics when I've personally operated on Christian Harris, who is a trauma survivor. He had an ED thoracotomy to stop, he lost his pulses. We opened his chest just to buy us some time to fix the bleeding in his belly. He told me during his ICU stay and his step-down stay that he had had an out-of-body experience whereby he saw people working on him and he felt that he did not want to let his grandmom and mom down. And so he remembered fighting. And so now he's a speaker at some of our, hi Chaz, at some of Chaz's, our intervention and prevention program, specifically YOLO, which is called You Only Live Once, and he'll talk about that later. Christian is just one of many young people in the city who are now facing with severe morbidity. So a 17-year-old like Raekwon Briscoe, who I actually also took care of, this was on USA Today, so I'm not breaking HIPAA. You know, the bullets have no names, as Briscoe said. It may not have been intended for him, but it went into his spine. And now he's a 17-year-old who is a quadriplegic. You don't need to show him statistics. My colleague here, Daryl Chambers, has said they made the ultimate sacrifice, and it will not be in vain. So who better to lead this fight and this issue than the community? We don't have to tell them stats. They're living it. We're a rich city. We're the corporate capital of the country, the headquarters for DuPont, where we were. We have Fortune 500 companies here. We have the resources. Do we have the will? And it's a little bit of a redundant question if we're talking about translational research, because it also has to do with, well, who cares if these people have the will? We need to have it coming from the community. Again, a lot of nods there. But that said, we do have our Level 1 Trauma Center is dedicated to the American College of Surgeons' national campaign of Stopping the Bleed. There is funding available for this if anyone wants to identify communities that need training. I thought that 19801, 802, 805 could probably use the training, because in 2018 we've had 16 shootings and already 4 homicides, and it's already the beginning of March. Did I get that wrong? Do you know more? Because Darryl always knows about more shootings because he's up to date on it all the time. I'm looking at the hospital data. Is that okay? Yes. All right. So we are going to the community to use Stop the Bleed as a way to start the dialogue. Is this a pointer? Yeah, okay. So here, sorry, it won't hit. I think I'm like on the wall there. The transformational educational concept starts with the dialogue, and we are using the Stop the Bleed education as the beginning step. The bottom should say reflection. I apologize for that. And after we reflect on what we're learning about, then we do participatory action. Traditional academic research or outcomes, what would you guys want to do? If you guys were traditional academic research, you'd want to know, can the student call 911? Because in Stop the Bleed, we teach ABCs. A, alert. B, find the bleeding. C, compress. So can the student call 911? Can the student find a pulse? Do they know how to put on a tourniquet? Can they apply pressure? Can they pack a wound? Pretty easy things. If you're just in a conference hall and you're working on a dummy, you can probably do all these things. The outcomes from a traditional academic research would say, well, does it save a life? Are you reducing the amount of blood transfusions? The hospital would want to reduce the cost of blood transfusions and length of stay. How many students can we train? Is this actually possible? And does it help our first responders? Does it help compress the hot zone to the yellow zone to make it a green zone? Can you use your tactical combat skills to get the patient out of the hot zone and get him into a definitive care? So does it aid first responders? And I say to you what Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, said, any situation in which some men prevent others from engaging in the process of inquiry, i.e. engaging in the process of research, is one of violence. So to alienate the humans from their own decision-making is to change them into objects. That's profound, because here I am at a level 1 trauma center, I get the funding for the Stop the Bleed, and I want to do this thing because I think it's important. But I'm not including the community, then it's violence. I'm just continuing the cycle. So we're using the Stop the Bleed as in a community-engaged research approach whereby we have an opportunity for reflection. And when we started talking about this, my eyes were opened to some very interesting and eye-opening realities. And one of them was that some members in the community were concerned that police would think that they were interfering with a crime scene. In fact, I'm a physician, and when I talk about going to a patient, I always say I go to their bedside, even if they're not in a bed. I go to their bedside. And that's what I think of it. People in the community are referring to where someone is laying in blood as the crime scene. And that was mind-boggling to me. When I was a resident at Temple University, I had a police officer coming in while we were trying to resuscitate, and he said, tell me who shot you, tell me who shot you. And we were trying to get the IVs and the blood in. And I said, sir, please, if you give us some time, if you don't move, this is going to be a homicide and not just a shooting, because we need to save this person. So we have a good relationship with the police in the trauma bay. He respectfully moved back. Later on, he got the information he needed. But the question was, what kind of relationship is there in the community with police or first responders that I, as a researcher, am not aware of, or I, as a trauma surgeon, am not aware of? Eye-opening. I did not know that this was happening. And I had not known had I just said, hey, everybody, come to Christiana at the Ammon Center. We're going to have some light refreshments, and I'm going to show you how to put a tourniquet on. Great. Thank you. And I would have said, hey, Christiana, I trained 200 people how to place a tourniquet. We're doing something about the violence. No, we don't do that. So the reflection is now going to be integrated into our education. And this is a picture from Ujima Medics, Ujima, Ujima Medics in Chicago. It is a community-based medic association. They're nonprofit, and they essentially teach bleeding control, asthma exacerbation, first aid. They try to help the community before the first responders can get to them. And in one of their trainings, they identified similar problem because In the city of Chicago, the police are not, they don't have to apply first aid to a bleeding victim. They're protected to do that. They don't have to do that. I'm not saying that all police do that, but they're not mandated to. So it became an issue in Chicago whereby they started role-playing. What do you say to a Chicago PD person who's in your face saying, this is a crime scene, get out, we're putting the yellow tape around, you must leave, and now you're holding pressure on someone? What would you do? Never been in this situation, did not even know it was an issue. But now we're going to incorporate it into our trainings. Paulo Freire also said, leaders, that's all of us, who do not act dialogically but insist on imposing their decisions, do not organize the people, they manipulate them. And they do not liberate, nor are they liberated, they oppress, which means don't pat yourself on the back, and I won't pat myself on the back if I just trained 200 people, or now I did some, and now I did some training on how to talk to the cops. It goes beyond that, and that's why we're talking about whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teaches in the act of learning. I'm learning. I'm trying to keep my mind open. And the PAR researchers are 11th Street identified credible messengers that are trained in research methodology. They're affiliated. Some of them are affiliated with the University of Delaware, and they're affiliated with city organizations and government. This is the PAR team, which Darryl will talk about for a sec. If you build it, they will come, as long as it's PAR approved, is what I think. And so I have, this is from the Stop the Bleed website where we download the PowerPoint. We have trained physician residents, attending residents, anybody who can, how to train this. We've changed the traditional logos for health and paramedics into something that resounds in the community, street medic, first aid. We're providing the space for the dialogue, going to the William Hicks Anderson Community Center, barbershops, Christina Cultural Arts Center. We went to Camp Fresh, Chris Moore, Kathy Canatelli, thank you, the Youth Empowerment Project, and Hope Commission. We're changing the community engaged research to affect change. I wrote this on there because I don't know where we're going to go with the research because, like I said, it's community based. But for those who much is given, much is expected, and that is what we're going to do.
1 minute.
Yeah, sorry, thanks.
Anybody here know Dr. Yasser Payne? Yes. So I always had this problem because there be the people who I work with, they're so passionate about their work, they usually take up all my time, and I don't get a chance to say anything. But fortunate enough for me that we will be having a workshop later on, and these are just some of the slides. I'm not going to go through them. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of these things right here and how the PAR family has grown from what we used to refer to as the PAR team, the research team, to the PAR family. So how we move from that isolated I to that collective we, and how we're now having our roots still embedded in the community, still sponsoring local activities, local events, and how eventually what we want to do is build healthy communities. So this Wilmington Under Pressure to Stop the Bleeding campaign is all part of that, building a healthy community. And thank you guys always. I really wanted to go into it, but I can go into it during the workshop. So I'll see y'all then. All right.
We're going to take about 5 minutes just in case there are any burning questions for any of our speakers before we take a break. Our speakers are all available during the poster session currently. If you want to come up to them, they're also, as Darryl said, he's doing a workshop later this afternoon. We thank you all for your attention, and Dr. Khan will take us to break.
Thank you, Mia. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pappas, and to all the presenters. I was just struck by, thank you. Please give them a round of applause. I was struck by, when we talk about translational research, sometimes having to explain what that means. But if you think about this morning's presentations and what you heard about examples where there was a basic science or a research problem, such as breast cancer genetics, which then needed essential community involvement to go to the next level. You have another example where you have a community set of tragedies, community violence, and you have research to address that. And I'm not sure I can offer a better explanation than that spectrum. So that's what translation research looks like. It means translating work from the bedside to the community to the lab and all over again. So I think the cycle is very well illustrated by the morning. We are going to adjourn to the poster session and coming back here. The next session starts at 10:45. Dr. Lee Pachter is going to lead that, and I'm told Lee gets very upset when folks show up late for his session. So we're going to actually have folks be back here at 10:40. Gives us plenty of time to interact, grab a snack, and be back here in about 20 minutes. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Folks, so this is our 1-minute warning to get settled and grab your caffeine, and we'll get Dr. Pachter and his team going in just a couple of minutes as well. Hope you enjoyed the poster sessions outside. Again, it was terrific to see the diversity of all the work that's being presented, and over the last 5 years of ACCEL, our colleagues have really come a long way in engaging the community in all of their work. So the posters were fantastic. Lee, how is your team set to go? Okay, all right, very good. So we're gonna get restarted here, especially as folks trickle in to try to keep us on time. Thus far, we appear to be on time. Let's see how much we can deviate from that in the next session. But it's my pleasure to introduce the second podium panel for the day. And this one is going to be led and moderated by Dr. Lee Pachter. Dr. Pachter is Professor and Director of Community and Clinical Integration in the Department of Pediatrics at Nemours AI DuPont Hospital for Children. He focuses on social determinants of health and health disparities. He is also a co-director for ACCEL's Community Engagement and Outreach component. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lee Pachter.
Thank you, Omar, and welcome everybody. Good morning. We have two presentations in this session, but before we do the presentations, does everybody notice that on our tables there are these blue forms here? At some point today, I'd like everybody, if possible, to fill out this form. This is a form which is going to help us, ACCEL, assess, it's an assessment to identify what are the important health and healthcare research areas that ACCEL needs to make sure that we're doing research in. We definitely want to have a lot of community engagement in identifying what the salient and important areas of research are. So we're asking all of you today, if you have some time, it'll just take about 2 or 3 minutes in between presentations, to pick up one of these forms and fill it out. There's going to be a box in the back of the room that you can hand in your filled out form. So I really appreciate that. We're going to get straight to the talks because I want to make sure we have enough time for talks as well as discussions afterwards. Our first presentation is from Joanne Abbott, and the title of the presentation is The Division of Developmental Disability Services Health Matters Pilot Study, Delaware's Roadmap for Engaging Adults with Intellectual and/or Developmental Disabilities in Health Promotion.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Pachter. My name is Joanne Abbott. On behalf of the Division of Developmental Disabilities Services in Delaware, I am pleased to present Delaware's roadmap for engaging individuals with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities in health promotion. Which one? Okay. There we go. Where is Delaware on the road to health promotion? Delawareans with IDD have higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. We all know that physical activity has many health benefits. However, Delawareans with IDD report lower levels of exercise and physical activity. Delawareans with IDD also face many barriers to being active including a lack of supportive environments and the lack of appropriate learning tools that would encourage self-determination. To address this health disparity need, illustrated on this slide, is engagement with Health Matters program. A Health Matters pilot program was implemented at DDDS in 2016 at the 3-day programs for IDD. The pilot requirements were, first, the staff were trained and certified on how to run a health promotion program. And once trained, the certified staff completed a 12-week health promotion program on the Health Matters educational curriculum. And lastly, the pre-post biometric comparison measurements of the participants' height, weight, body mass index, and blood pressures were recorded on a de-identified data tracker. To provide you with more information about Health Matters curriculum, Health Matters is research-based, field-tested curriculum that engages people with IDD, showing them how to develop clear and exercise and nutrition goals, to develop an exercise routine, improve health knowledge, and promotes their self-determination. This model also trained the staff on how to engage and how to work with the person with IDD and to develop goals. And some of the goals that the individuals used were learning to use a treadmill. They'd never been on a treadmill before, so they wanted to learn to use a treadmill safely. And also, or a simple goal could be just take a walk in the neighborhood, with a friend. For my process evaluation, after the program was completed, I used the method for assessing the multiple components of the program's implementation. The 4 elements of the process evaluation were reach, setting, fidelity, and cost. Reach is the extent to which the pilot attracted and retained its intended audience. That's also important for funding, as well as improves the quality of the study. Fidelity is the extent to which the implementation of the program followed the Health Matters requirement, and the setting was measured by validated research tools to identify the environment's needs and capacity. And lastly, the costs of the program were analyzed. Once all of the elements of the process evaluation were completed, they were integrated into a SWOT, the Strength, Weakness, Opportunities, and Threat tool for an analysis. And this is envisioned to be important for a statewide implementation of the program. So the results for the reach, participation, and engagement. We found high participation in the 10 adults who participated, with 8 out of the 10 completing all of the 12-week curriculum. There was high primary care provider participation, with all of the health professionals returning their approvals for the program. And we also found that the staff trainers were very satisfied with the program and felt more confident in teaching people with IDD on healthy behaviors. And there was also, not to forget, the individuals who were in the study also made comments, positive comments about how they liked the study, that they made friends, helped their pain, and it was fun. They had a lot of fun. For the setting, the Health Matters assessment survey tools were used to assess the needs and the capacity for supporting a health promotion within our community. The capacity was assessed with 30 statements on policies that are either in place now or need to be put in place in the future. For example, we found that our division valued health promotion, but we could improve by having clear health promotion policies. For the needs assessment just included 7 statements that addressed facilities, wellness, and committees that support health promotion. And we found that nearby there was a beautiful park with a walking, jogging trail. Didn't seem like too many people were using it during the day. So we identified that as a way that we can improve our fitness as well as our individuals by establishing a wellness committee. To summarize, we found our environment currently in the early stages of developing a supportive environment for health promotion, especially for people with IDD. So from the SWOT analysis, we also found that there's a wonderful opportunity here in developing support with the community collaboration. And that's needed really to sustain the benefits of the 12-week program. The individuals 12-week, but after that, do they go back to their, old habits? Illustrated here is what we envision to be Health Matters Delaware, which is a proposal approach for coordinating community collaborators to help develop supporters, as well as create more supportive environment for people with IDD. The approach includes a couple unique elements. The first element will be to introduce a nurse coordinator who's like an outreach out to the different agencies in the community. And this, the nurse coordinator would be responsible in training and also providing community awareness about health promotion and the Health Matters program. And the second unique element is to build on the early engagement of primary care physicians by providing the PCPs with the Health Matters training and access to nutritionists, physical therapists, and PharmD resources needed to sustain also the primary care's engagement in health promoters for these Health Matters graduates with IDD. So looking at the cost, we estimated the cost of the program to be $300 per participant. That is actually low in comparison to others health promotion programs, and it currently does not require that the people with IDD are charged at any cost. And there is also the potential that health care savings costs. For example, we found diastolic blood pressures. The diastolic blood pressures pre and post participation trended down. 50% of the participants were noted to have hypertension, defined as a diastolic blood pressure of 80 or higher. And illustrated here are the pre-post health promotion participation diastolic blood pressures of the 8 participants. The mean diastolic blood pressure of 81 millimeters of mercury pre-participation trended down lower to 77 post. So it's important to note that the diastolic blood pressure did decrease in 5 of the 8 participants completing the curriculum. So if this is sustained, we could project a decrease for stroke and its related healthcare costs. Limited studies have also demonstrated a significant decrease in healthcare costs within the first year of a health promotion. Let's get Delaware on the road to health promotion for IDD. To summarize, Delaware's pilot demonstrated that Health Matters is an effective learning tool for people with disabilities in order for them to self-determine exercise participation and healthy meal choices. The strengths of the program were there were high levels of engagement by the participants, the DDS staff trainers, and primary care physicians, which create the necessary supportive environments to sustain health benefits. Also, as mentioned, the lowering the blood pressure and the low cost per participant predicts that statewide adoption of Health Matters would likely reduce the yearly healthcare costs well more than the program's startup costs. Thank you very much. And just to mention, there is a poster, it's not mine, but it's a similar poster to my health promotion, poster 23 on display here. Thank you.
Thank you. So the final presentation for this morning is called The Looking Glass, Insights into Homeless Elders' Barriers to Care. And it's being presented by James Ellison and Loretta Consiglio Ward. And the special guest presenter.
Yes, thank you. And also Joel Harris, who's joining us this morning. So I'm Jim Ellison. I'm the Swank Foundation Endowed Chair in Geriatrics and Memory Care. I will let our other, why don't you sit down? I'm going to begin the presentation, and I want to mention that, as you'll see on the title slide, there are a number of people involved who are not up here on the podium but have been part of this project, which was supported by a Christiana Care Physicians Professionalism Council grant and approved by the IRB at Christiana. Okay. There we go. All right. We became interested in the problem of the elder homeless population. And the reason for our interest in this small but very important population is that they suffer greatly and they are a very costly group of people to take care of. And their medical and mental health care is very limited in large part by their difficulty taking advantage of the resources that are available and the lack of resources that are available to them. The elder homeless population has a very high rate of medical morbidity, and they're a growing population in contrast to other subpopulations of the homeless in the United States. They're exposed to adverse environmental conditions, which mean that they age very rapidly and prematurely, so that we often think of the homeless elders as representing those people 50 and older rather than 65 and older. Here's a 97-year-old. And the average age in many of the studies is in the 60s and 70s, but there are people up to their 90s who are homeless. As I mentioned, the older homeless population is increasing, and the age of the population is increasing. Becoming homeless is a new thing for many older people. We're not just talking about the population of younger, say chronically mentally ill individuals who age into elder homelessness, but we're talking about people who become homeless in old age for the first time as a result of changes in their finances or their relationships and support or their living situations or health problems and medical bankruptcy. And then there's also a large barrier to leaving homelessness for the elders because of the high housing cost and the limited amount of money that comes with Social Security benefits, which can't really support them to live independently, and also the lack of accommodations for older homeless people. In large part, this is also driven by the aging of the baby boomer cohort, and you can see this in this graph here, which shows among older homeless veterans the growth of the older population. Delaware actually has one of the lower homeless elder populations in the United States. It's estimated that there may be only 615 homeless people in Delaware. That seems low to me, but people may have thoughts about this. And with the increasing poverty rates around the country, Delaware is becoming more like other states in this respect. As I mentioned, there's a high rate of morbidity. 85% of the homeless elders have chronic medical conditions, much more than other homeless groups. Many of them are mental health, many are substance abuse. As well, there are also the geriatric syndromes, such as urinary incontinence, problems with falls, vision, and hearing. A group of researchers in Boston followed some homeless elders over a period of about 4 years, and they found that there was a grim prognosis for this group of people, that at the end of this 4 years, more than a quarter of them, almost a third of them, were dead. Many were still on the streets, and only a small number had found housing. In Wilmington, we do have some resources, including the medical clinics at Christiana Care and the St. Clair Mobile Health Clinic and other systems, but it may be difficult for people to take advantage of them. But I want to introduce Joel Harris, who's the executive director at St. Patrick's Center, because he'll tell you about St. Patrick's and how that's a very important resource for the elders.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. St. Patrick's Center is an oasis in Wilmington. We serve 19801, 19802 communities. The national average poverty rate is 26%. In those communities, it's 44%. We're definitely a sanctuary for people in need in Wilmington. On the Wilmington East Side since 1971. We provide many services in a dignified, respectful manner. We try to meet every consumer that comes in our doors with at their need. We try to really help people. We just don't pass them by. We really try to help people. And many of the people that we do serve are elderly. We have food programs, transportation services, homeless respite services, clothing bank, recreational, educational activities, and individualized services. Our food programs is broken down in several different categories. I call it senior nutrition, which we serve commodity boxes once a month to seniors between the ages. You have to be 60 years old to receive this box, and seniors, they really look forward to this. We have 3 groups that rotate each week at St. Patrick's Center, and it's about 260 seniors that we serve with this program. We also participate with Meals on Wheels, which is ran through City Fair. We serve about 60 to 65 homebound seniors daily that can't get out to the center, and that's a big program. We also provide produce and emergency food weekly to seniors. We serve about 1,500 families per month, and I say about 20% of those individuals or families that we serve are seniors, senior families that's living single in the community. And with our transportation services, we provide to and from transportation from home to the center. Also to medical appointments. We have stand-in medical appointments every day for our seniors. We have 8 seniors right now that's a stand-in cancer medical appointments that we take every day for chemo. Homeless respite services. I see about, if we say seniors is about 50 to 55 in the homeless population, I see about 65 to 75 seniors a day at St. Patrick's Center that's looking for services, looking for help, just looking for somebody that can give them some type of dignity, that's going to listen to them and help them navigate the system. They come and get showers, they wash their clothes. We have storage facilities for them to keep their belongings when they can't navigate the community because of their transient situation. but we try to meet them at their need. We also have a clothing bank that we provide seniors with clothing. We serve about 80 individuals a day, and about 25 of those individuals are seniors that need clothing. We do have a great senior program manager at St. Patrick's Center. Her name is Devin Raimondo. She provides a lot of recreation activities for our seniors. They I'm sorry, I'm not multitasking. That's transportation. Okay. Now that's our recreational room right there. We have a daily attendance of individuals that play dominoes, poker, and trominoes. And they look forward to playing poker and dominoes every day. We also take our seniors out to local restaurants so they can get some involvement in the community, feel part of the community. Shady Maple and Golden Corral is #1 places they love to go. And the individualized services, that's ran through our social work department that we partner with Christiana Care, and we have 2 part-time social workers that are awesome. We also have 3 volunteer social workers that come in periodically throughout the week, and we see so many issues with our seniors that if we wasn't in place, it'd be a bigger epidemic, I believe. Our social workers are social workers, but they also turn into case managers. A lot of times the seniors, they cannot navigate when they're out in the community. They don't know what to do. So they really need some help, someone that's kind-hearted, that can direct them in our community. We also provide a newsletter that we give out to our seniors monthly, so just to give them a heads up of what's going on for the month so they can plan accordingly. That's about it. All right.
And I'm Loretta Consiglio Ward, and what I'm going to tell you a little bit about is our partnership with St. Patrick's Center and understanding the healthcare needs and reasons or barriers for accessing the health system through our work that we've enjoyed partnership with St. Patrick's. So our study really was to take a look at 3 main objectives. One is we want to understand the health status and the healthcare needs of the homeless elders. As Joel introduced, there are a number of services that are helping support respite, food, clothing, and even socialization within the community. But we did have a reach out from St. Patrick's that requested that we help them with more healthcare type of services. So we needed to better understand that, so that's our first objective there. In addition, this assessment is really not a physiological assessment. It does not include a physical exam, but it really does address recognizing current medical conditions, access to medications, social determinants of health data. The second part of the objective of this study is to help us understand and help create and make available screening and preventative care for this population, and also support disease management in a way that we facilitate connections to any existing relationships they have within the healthcare setting, primary care setting, or community. And then the third objective is, which is near and dear to my heart, is to help provide an educational experience for health trainees. We utilize medical students from Jefferson University to conduct the health needs assessment, and this gives them the opportunity to learn how to conduct an assessment within the setting of what a homeless elder may consider home, and hone in on those skills and how to dialogue and create their skills and techniques. So it is a cross-sectional study. I mentioned that it is a structured interview administered by supervised students. We encourage the students to have more of a dialogue and conversation, and to this occurs right in the milieu. So some of the social areas, we encourage the student to have that interview. The assessment tool is based on an adaptation from two main tools, which are the Easy Care and the cane. We've also incorporated the mini-cog as well as the homeless vulnerability index to detect for those that may be at higher risk for mortality. Our intended sample size is 100, and what I'm going to show you is just some information about our preliminary results of the first 50 assessments. So what we are learning so far is that the distribution of the homeless elders at service at St. Patrick's are, majority are female, and also many do have insurance, and that is due to connections to the health insurance navigation through social workers. We are detecting a good percentage of those that have mental health or well-being concerns. A good percent, more than half, are feeling anxious, frightened, or worried. And we have detected through this early sample that 25% have scored positive for dementia using the mini-cog. We also want to understand a little bit about their educational background. The information is here, and you can see that there is a good number of education folks that have some education. The other area that seems to kind of stand out, and those of us who are very familiar with Wilmington and those zip code areas, is safety. And a good percent are feeling safe outside of where they stay. Where they stay is could be variable. And also have either been threatened or harassed and have been a victim or witnessed violence. The next block of information is we asked them, and this is self-reported, where have they visited for any type of healthcare need in the last 12 months? And what this data is suggesting is that they are accessing the healthcare system fairly regularly, but they're not really establishing a relationship and maintaining health needs due to probably other priorities in their own survival in their environment. When we ask them what are some of their barriers to accessing the healthcare system, transportation is the number one that's being reported. We do ask them to select all that apply. And then financial issues are also coming up, unable to pay co-pays or the deductibles that are part of the service, as well as no insurance or unable to pay, period. The other variable that is also surfaced is fear, and that is fear of the health system. And one of the things that we're trying to promote by the access of the medical students in the center is to build that trusting relationship with a healthcare provider. So one of the things we're also detecting, and it's not unusual or not a surprise to us, is that the percent that are indicating that these are some of their current medical conditions. The top one, by no surprise, is 60% are reporting that they do have high blood pressure. This is followed by joint pain or back pain, with also dentition as one of the highest opportunities, and subsequently depression and mental health and diabetes and memory. All of those types of things are no surprise to us. So where we hope to go with this, like I said, this is preliminary results. We still are hoping to complete 100 assessments and help us define further more how to guide and allocate resources to support their healthcare needs, to help focus guest education, to help maintain some of those healthy conditions, and to appeal for more support in carrying this work forward for this important group of our neighbors in our community. I would like to thank you and open this up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both groups of presenters. We unfortunately don't have time for a lot of questions now, but throughout the day, hopefully you can come up to the presenters and ask any questions that you'd like. I'd like to bring up Dr. Khan again, who will introduce our community panel.
Thank you, Lee. Terrific. Well, thank you to everyone, and let's give the presenters and Dr. Pachter a round of applause. Appreciate it. So before we transition to our community panel, Jennifer has reminded me of two quick housekeeping things. One, for those of you who are having any trouble accessing the Wi-Fi, it's UDEL Guest, and there are a somewhat complicated series of instructions on how to do that, but they're at the front desk, and if you can access those, that would be terrific. The other piece is around the presentations themselves. We will try to make all the PowerPoints, for those of you who have shared them with us, accessible on the website. So those will be available after the conference as well. So the same ACCEL website that you know and love, de-ctr.org, that will have all the presentations and other information. I'm going to bring Jen Passarella up here actually to introduce our community panel. As you know, she is one of the backbones of this conference and has been responsible for essentially all of the arrangements that you see here today. But please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I have the pleasure of introducing our chairs of the community panel. First and foremost, a big thank you goes out to Marlene Saunders. She really helped pull the panel discussion together. Marlene is currently our Community Advisory Council Chair for the Delaware CTR ACCEL program. She is retired, but still an active social worker. She received her doctorate degree in social work from University of Penn. She's the former executive director for National Association of Social Work Delaware chapter, who actually provided the CEU credits this afternoon. She's also the former chair of the Department of Social Work at Delaware State University. And our co-chair, Rita Landgraf, who most of you are familiar with already, she has participated in a number of our ACCEL events and has been supportive of the program since the time of the award. Rita is currently the Professor of Practice and Distinguished Health and Social Services Administrator at the University of Delaware, and she's also the Director of University of Delaware Partnership for Healthy Communities. And I will hand it off to Marlene and Rita to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Hollywood. Good morning again. This is the community panel discussion. And as we were planning today's event, we thought it was important to have a discussion reflecting the point of view of community. And we thought it was of utmost importance to have representation by people, ordinary people, who have a unique perspective regarding health disparities. And they have a unique perspective with respect to the value of community engagement, why it's important, how well it's doing now in terms of representation of people in the quest to find knowledge. Because as Dr. Dunstan so eloquently informed us this morning, that in order to have the knowledge that is necessary to treat diseases, is everyone has to be involved. And with genome science, you know, diversity is not a bad thing. So we are very fortunate to have Shay Robinson and Leslie Johnson as community, participants, on the panel. I'm not going to take a lot of time to say who they are because we want to make the best use of this portion of the program. If you turn to page 9, you will get their background. In their responses to questions, I imagine they may weave in some personal information that might give perspective regarding what they say. We have some questions that were formed, and I'm going to, no, how's it go? Rita, you start off with the first one? Okay. And Rita and I are going to alternate with asking questions. And Rita has the first question.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real honor to be with you. And so for our first question, this goes to both Shay and Leslie. We understand the reasons for some groups' resistance to social and medical research. What is your estimate of the situation now?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I believe there's still a lack of trust in the community. When you think about, when you think about things that happen in our history, we were speaking earlier, even in regards to Henrietta Lacks and some other things that were experienced in the community. There is a lack of trust in the medical research, unfortunately, because of the exploitation and some of the abuse that's been occurring. I can speak from a personal experience for myself and a two-part relationship here, but I was married to my late husband of 10.5 years who passed away with sickle cell disease. And during that time, I personally witnessed some of those disparities that we talked about earlier. Judgment, when going to the hospital and automatically being judged by, not the person not knowing the individual and maybe not knowing the disease, but judging him by, okay, he's in here every morning, every other morning at 2 o'clock in the morning with a sickle cell crisis. He can't be having a sickle cell crisis. He's coming in here to get a fix. And that's what we would hear. And having at moments to be a caregiver, in those moments, I had to be there all the time when he was not strong enough to speak for himself so that he did not, always feel the blow of that type of experience. So, with that I think it's important, for compassion training for a lot of people in the medical field. This is based on my personal experience. There was a lack of compassion. And with that, I would like to praise Tova Community Health, which not just provided compassion for people like my late husband, but also treated the individual and not just the disease.
Thank you. Thank you for that level of feedback. And how about you, Leslie?
Well, as far as research, I think it has gotten better. There is still that stigma, when you think about different things that happen in our communities, like the Tuskegee experiment. So when our community thinks about research, they automatically go to those situations. It has gotten better, I believe, because the community is more knowledgeable. And as Shay was saying about Tova Healthcare, I'm a part of Tova Healthcare as a patient and also on the board. We make sure that the community is well aware of what's going on, and we include them. Dr. Anderson, who's the CEO of Tova Healthcare, she makes sure that me personally, that the overall health for me is taken care of. It's not just I can call her when I'm in a crisis, but I can also call her for other situations. Like a support group. We have a support group. The research, people with sickle cell are like, okay, they're doing research, but what's happening? So we kind of think like, well, nothing's being done. They'll talk about it for a little while, and then you don't hear anything else. So as I said, it is getting better, but it's still not where it should be.
Thank you both. We also want to value that lived experience. That lived experience is critically important and can set the tone for how we address these issues, and even from a compassionate perspective, how do we treat the whole person and not just the disease?
Right.
And I just want to share a personal story, and I've shared this, with some folk. My involvement, on the Community Advisory Council is very interesting because when I was coming up, my mother always told me, whatever you do, don't participate in medical research. Now, I refer to myself as a Board of Education child, so I go back, to the period when segregation, was real profound. Research was used, for example, to document or to affirm the inferiority, of African Americans. So that was part of her context, and it helps to understand, the advice, that she gave me. But when I was nominated to be a part of this committee, and I had the opportunity to work with Omar, and Jennifer, my mind has changed. There are a great many ethical protections now to support or to ensure, that certain groups, people, are not exploited. And through, genome science, we now understand that the more diversity we have, the more knowledge, you have, and the more able, you are to understand, what's going on. And it gives you a better chance to treat, diseases on an individual basis. And that's where, the precise medicine comes in. So I hope, Dr. Dunstan, I'm showing off and somehow demonstrating, what I've learned, just as a part of being on the CAC and this conference. Okay, I have the next question.
You have the next question.
Okay, I have the next question. As a follow-up to the first question, the next question is, what more can community do or should do to increase sustained involvement of community in research?
Well, I think exposure is key. Going into the communities, just when they were speaking earlier about the breast cancer experience, and I am a breast cancer survivor, prior to being diagnosed, I was exposed to the number of women, African American women, that were, impacted by this disease, not knowing that I would be one experiencing it later. And because of that exposure, I was a willing participant when I was asked to, be a part of the research. So whatever research was required, even with, the fear and, knowing things that happened before, I just trusted in God, and it was like, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and, participate in the experience so that they can, use the information or the research from my perspective and be able to help other women of, African American women as well. So I think exposure is key, whether it's going into, churches and, presenting something like this, in that type of form, and, giving other, women that type of exposure to understand that it's important, really to participate in these experiments.
Okay, I'm thinking explaining to the community how they will benefit and why it's important for research. If they don't understand what's going on or how they're going to benefit from it, they're not going to be interested. Making sure that whatever their situation is, that is addressed. So they'll say, for instance, okay, we're talking about, I can only speak about sickle cell. So they heard research is being done, as I said before, but so, for instance, in our community, we have the sickle cell walk given by Tova Healthcare. So then they ask questions. So where's this money going to? Then you explain that it's going to research. So then they want to participate because they know that it's going to, the sickle cell walk money is going towards research. So if they, if they understand where it's going and how they will benefit, then they'll be more perceptive.
As we think about both those questions, and Marlene, also thank you for your lived experience relative to why it was difficult to engage in research because of what will that data be used for, right? So do you see just as a follow-up, do you see positive changes? We talk a lot about cultural sensitivity, cultural competency. Do you see us trending in the right direction? Because I know, Shay, your first comment was trust. And then when I thought of what Marlene said, it resonates, right? From that root cause of where that mistrust started. Yes. And that's authentic and that's real. Do you see that shifting?
I do in some areas. For example, I think when people are involved in something from cradle to grave, it deepens that partnership. So I looked at when the gentleman was speaking, I think Dr. Chambers, and they showed the picture of the mural, which I forgot the name of the community center, but it's in Riverside. And I saw the picture of the young man on there, which I know the parent of that person. And I think what happens is when people become, when they know people that's in the community that's involved, word of mouth, like, oh, I want to be a part of that because they're involved in that. So I think, I think it is trending in the right direction when you see things like that, so.
And I heard about the 5K too.
Right.
The exposure builds that trust factor.
Because it makes the connection between the community and
if I just make one other comment, I think the thing that's unique about Shay and Leslie is that they're not only patients, but they have become advocates. So I think in a unique, special way that kind of represents a continuum, of care. So that, and I just wanted to, make that point. So perhaps one of the things that community can do, if you are a patient, talk with your doctor. I'm really interested in doing more than just coming to you, for treatment. Is there something, that I can do to advance technology, science, understanding, and knowledge with respect to my illness or other illnesses about which I may be interested.
So Dr. Dunstan, we want to bring you into this conversation as well. My question to you is, what can researchers do in addition to conferences like this one to increase sustained involvement of community in research?
Okay. I want to say that the context in which we do research, even with communities now, the mindset is very much oriented towards the benefits and advantage, I'll say, of the researcher, the academician, okay? Our hunger is for knowledge, but we get reward from getting grants, getting publications, getting to hold conferences and being presenters. Those are all aspects of reward for doing the research to get the knowledge. The goal of the research, however, is to solve the problem. And if we look at the stats of health disparities, when we had the whole genome sequenced, now let's look at the stats on health disparities to how much the problem is being solved, brings us to me to where we are today in terms of, I consider the community engagement and participation part the missing piece to using the knowledge to solve the problem. To solve the problem, we have to engage the community as a stakeholder. Genomics is a $1 trillion business and growing. How much of our thinking about engaging the community considers how can there be economic development to the community from being a participant in this genomics era? One of the things that we have to do is that we're doing is looking at the cost is down now. We want to do whole genome sequencing. But before genome sequencing, even now, we do genotyping. We have panels of these markers that we say that we can look to see what the genotype is so that we can determine what's the best intervention, or as we would say in the pharmacogenomics, the right drug for the right person at the right time in the right amount. Okay? That's going to improve treatment of the patient. But let me say this to this group. Genomics came into being really not so much to treat disease as to give us the knowledge of how to prevent disease.
Wow.
Genomics really is a game changer in health. It was the medical community that put the power there to get the genome funded through Congress so that we could get a sequence. But the knowledge that's already in the genome that's available to us now is a knowledge that will give us a power to know how to prevent disease. We need community engagement. We need to think about how can we engage people who are giving us this data to do the analysis with the genome map. How can we make it economically empowering to the community. That's how you can, what's going to be the benefit to the community other than the altruistic increasing knowledge that can help somebody? You know, you want to do that. I mean, we want to do that. But if you really want community engagement, we need to go to the community and find out what is it they want to be a participant in this study that would make them be advocates for. We got to get our community people in here, because there's information and knowledge to come that's not only to treat the disease, but to build the community. And that's a piece that I think I would love to see the creative juices of the people in this audience who are dealing with community engagement. How can we make it economically an incentive? And I'm not talking about the token kind of money you give for coming in and giving a sample and answering the questionnaire. I'm not knocking, I'm saying that's well and good, but that can't even be measured on the scale of the genomics business community and what they get from investment in this area. I think we need to think about, are there ways that we can build economic empowerment for the community in being a stakeholder in research?
That's great. I think you should be going to Washington as we talk about all this health transformation, right? How does that connect? I think that really does resonate.
And for genomics, it's very straightforward. Like I was saying, my whole argument is that genomics is about variation. Each individual is unique. The genome, one of the first lessons from sequencing the genome was that while we are 99.9 the same in terms of the genome sequence, because we're all human, so we inherit a lot of the stuff that gives us 2 eyes in front, a nose in the middle. All of that's in the genome too. So all of this stuff that we see that makes us human in this physical sense, that's in the genome. But it's variation that we need to understand what is the meaning and the purpose of the variation in the parts, you know. We need variation to do that. The community is the source of the variation for understanding how social determinants. You see, we need genome environment interaction. The genome doesn't cause these problems by itself. Now, when we were studying diseases where the gene had a major effect, like sickle cell, where you can test for the gene, and if you're positive for this gene, you will have the expression of the disease. That's a level of genetic studies where you have a major gene that shatters out the fact that there's a whole context. But chronic diseases, these common diseases, are not single genes. They're whole communities, or if you will, systems of genes that work together to give you some measurable outcome. So you got to be able to not only map the genes. So we've done GWAS studies, as we told, we can get hundreds of genes that associate with this disease. But then how do those genes work together to cause the outcome that we're looking at? There's research to do that. We need variation. If we have people to recognize, genomics is saying the answer is in each of us. We need good data and for geneticists, the cream of the crop of the project is a family. For the geneticists, for the epidemiologists studying the whole population, but for the geneticist who's trying to track a particular thing, the family is the golden unit. But families make up populations. And so you design your studies to include families nested in your population so that you can be able to do the genetic. But my point is, Anil, you talk about respect. To get the answers to solve the problem, we need to respect the fact that everyone, not only the person with the disease, but for genetics, we need good data from the people in the family that don't have disease. You see? And in the old paradigm, where your motivation was because you're going to do some good for the person who's ill. But for these common diseases, you need the whole family, and you need people to give you right data, because your data influences the knowledge that comes. We're in what we call big data to knowledge, BD2K, they say. Your knowledge is only going to be as sound as your data. And your data only going to be as good as your relationship with the person you're collecting the data from. The community knows researchers that come in. They know how to give you the answers that they want, that you think you want. So there is some relationship building here where they need to know that the quality of the way they respond to the question and giving the information is going to be key to the outcome we get from this data. And they've got to want to participate in giving the data because there's some economic benefit. I think that's the way to get incentive. Build relationship as they get something by being truly a part of the community, a stakeholder. There's, like I said, genomics is a $1 trillion business now, and it has not topped. There's room to discuss how do we bring some of the end result product. Maybe if your genotype happens to be on a panel that gets flagged as the panel of the month for discovering something, maybe you get some dividend because your genome was in this panel. I mean, we got to be creative, but how do you make the fact that you're participating in getting the knowledge to solve problems a financial benefit? That's good. You'd be surprised as the number of people that then want to know, how do I get in this? Maybe we can make at Howard we have the idea with a genome bank where your genome was your deposit. And if your genome is actually used in some outcome, that you get dividends. And the earlier you put your genome in the bank, the more dividends you can get, especially if something comes out of it. So you have people wanting to know, do I have something that's going to lead to something that's really productive? But the idea is to think about, and to do that, you need to engage the community. Ask the community, what do we need? How can we make this something we want to participate in and be a part of?
Say amen, somebody. Well, here's question 4, and I think to some extent it's been answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway to stay on script, and it could be that asking the question allows us to say some things that we haven't said already. But anyway, the question is, how does community engagement contribute to achieving health equity, closing the gap to social determinants of health, reducing disparities, production of treatments, including medicines, that prevent and effectively treat illness?
Yes, well, I think different groups, health groups, need to know that there's a fair opportunity for their certain concern. If they're feeling like, okay, for instance, in research, and cancer research is extremely important. My mother is a cancer survivor. My friend Shay here is a cancer survivor. You hear a lot about cancer research and where it's going. You don't hear about research for other diseases like sickle cell. So if they feel that they're going to get a fair opportunity for in their community for the disease that impacts them, then it's going to be more participation.
I agree.
Shay, did you want to add to that?
Well, I agree to what she was saying. It's unfortunate that there isn't enough financial participation when it comes to research for sickle cell disease. And, I have my own personal reasons as to why, but I think, that really needs to change. And when we see, just speaking for African Americans, when we see diseases that it's said to impact mainly the African American community. When we see more participation in that area, when we see the research, being pushed to the forefront, like something like cancer, you would get more participation, from the community.
So that in of itself, I believe, is an equity issue that's leading to the disparity. And getting back to what Dr. Dunstan has been talking about, what creative measures can we put into place relative to combat that health inequity? And even thinking not necessarily just from a disease perspective, but the impact of the opportunity for all populations to have optimal health. So does anybody want to touch upon that? Do all populations have the opportunity for optimal health?
I don't think that all populations do. As far as me personally, I'm blessed because I'm a part of Tova Healthcare, like I said, who takes care of the whole person. Dr. Nina Anderson makes sure, that everything is taken care of, not only with my sickle cell, but with other situations going on with me health-wise. I travel with my mother. My mother's sitting over there, my big supporter, and I travel with my doctor, Dr. Nina Anderson. So they always, the two of them, along with other people, make sure that I'm going to be taken care of and that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. There are other individuals that don't have that. Like I said, I'm fortunate, that I'm a part of that care. But I don't think that all communities do.
And I'm sorry, and I can add to that just based on my experience on both sides. When we speak about sickle cell and cancer, I can say that I experienced, that optimal care for breast cancer treatment, right? And, getting all the treatment that I need, the support of my surgeon and all my doctors on that team. And I noticed I didn't have to build that team. For my late husband, we had to build that team. And it was a rough road in building that team, finding the right doctors, cardiologists, hematologists, and all of those people that, played a part in helping to serve the individual and serve him and how the disease impacted him. And we've seen the trouble, the trials, that he didn't experience that optimal care at all the time, So it was such a great benefit to be a part of Tova for him to experience that. And we have great insurance, and you think that makes a difference? It doesn't. It really doesn't.
And Dr. Dunstan, you touched upon even the economic side of that. As well, and how can we be more creative to do that level of linkage with the research, with populations that experience a high level of health inequity, and then how do we bring about an economic exposure that can actually bring forth some very meaningful solutions to the very populations that are impacted by these health disparities?
Yes, and I think your comment, I really appreciate both of your inputs because I'm thinking myself, and that's why I throw it out. We have to be creative. What are ways that we get ideas? And we start with the community. And with you sharing for sickle cell, perhaps there could be, if you participate as a community in this genomics research, for example, perhaps there could be money put in a fund that could actually be used by families to get that quality health care. But that's this is what I'm saying, that's one idea. But I think if we just think about what are the ways that we can make it an economic incentive to participate in this genomics era where we need the information from every individual. The beauty is we need the information from every individual. I can just sit and dream about a whole community participating in getting our genome in a registry, in a database. And we could create some kind of competition between communities in terms of their registries, make their registries valuable. Have the researchers pay to use the registry that you can work to develop with your academic partners, you know? But I mean, they're different. I can't imagine from this room the kinds of ideas that would come, but it would be ideas about how we engage the community in making it an incentive for why they would want to participate. And in our society, money is always an incentive. Right. And so, you know, I value, I'm a scientist, I love altruism, doing it for the good of knowledge. But if you want community participation in a real way where they take responsibility for the quality of the data, because the map genome is only as good as the data that you collect to try to find the genes. And crap in is crap out. Mm-hmm. It applies here too.
So you're really talking about an investment.
An investment.
But everybody
yes,
gets to invest.
Begin thinking of it in that way. Think of it like you do with your stocks and other kinds of things. Bring that mind to the table and what we need to do to make this.
And I think what I also hear from you, Doctor, is you're talking about authentic partnerships, where everyone comes to the table with the equal influence, the equal power structure.
And respect.
And respect.
Respect for the fact that we truly need your genome to understand what we're about.
For the greater good of the population, and to your point,
and the health.
And health. How do we get to the preventative side?
Healthy People 2020. We can tie it to Healthy
Yes,
People 2020.
We're hopeful for that Healthy People 2020.
Okay, well, one of my boss people is saying that, time is up, but there's just, one thing that I want to say about this project and why I feel so good about being a part, of the CAC is that it really compels researchers to not just look at disease and look at people in terms of their diseases, but it really compels physicians and researchers to really put on a social justice hat and engage with people through a different kind of relationship, a mutually beneficial, relationship. And as a social worker, relationships are very important to me. Those are it's the medium through which we do what we do. And advocacy, is what we're all about. Looking at things in a holistic way is what we're all about. And certainly this conference in genome science has really, brought that to, has reinforced that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel.
I'm going to ask our panelists to stay seated for just a couple of minutes because we do have time for a couple of questions. So we'd love to actually get some thoughts from the audience, and we'll let the co-chairs here moderate that. But love to get some questions and thoughts from you folks. Yes, Mia, Dr. Pappas.
That's awesome. One thing I'm thinking is how do we get the scientists or the researchers to come from the community? How do we start developing? How do we start developing the scientists from the community so you can bring all those wonderful ideas that others may not have because they don't have, as Rita said, that lived experience, but those scientists come from the community and are part of then the scientific team?
I would say going into the schools, as young as elementary. Kids are really, their minds are so, ready to absorb all the information. And if you go into those schools now with something like this, I think, that's a beginning part, that's a baby step to it.
I think participatory research is a way to engage the community as part of that research and to make them researchers themselves. I also think opportunities like ACCEL with the Community Advisory Committee can lend itself to more intimate engagement between community and those researchers. But like you said, how do we go to our researchers of the future and make sure that they're representative of all communities and inclusive of all populations? So I think we're getting better, but I think that we probably still have a way to go.
And I think too, and maybe Omar or Heather could speak to this, or Lee, a real problem, in the medical research arena is the underrepresentation of African Americans and other people of color, as researchers. And I understand the NIMH is trying to do something about that. Dr. Dunstan was involved in writing an article, that spoke to that. I know the CAC has that as a target issue that we will be dealing with.
So I'll speak to just one aspect of that, which is medical education. In Delaware, we have a program called DIMER, the Delaware Institute for Medical Education and Research, which has been around since 1969, and its function is really to help more Delawareans enter medical education and medical practice. It's just one small way in which we help Delawareans get placed to, in many cases, out-of-state medical schools and graduate schools for their education. We are trying very hard as a DIMER board member to attract folks from underserved communities, and that can include geographies and ethnicities. But that, again, is a small piece of the pie. I know that research and the rest of health sciences is a much bigger piece of that. So actually we'll ask for folks who maybe hear from some of those research initiatives, from IMBRI, from other types of initiatives who may want to speak to that, or Heather, if you or Lee would like to address that, please do. Yeah, go for it. Mike's coming to you as well, yeah.
My inner cheerleader might be. It's not. There's no easy answer to that, right? But when all of you are speaking about these problems, you start to get a knot in your stomach, right? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it better? And how do you get this pipeline of researchers and physicians that don't that look different, that don't, that make people think I can do that too. And really, it's complicated but simple. I think the only real way you do that is really meaningful relationships. I mean, I think if you asked Omar, myself, anyone here who's a researcher or a physician or whatever, they could point out several people who, provided mentorship, which is really about inspiration, believing in you more than you believed in yourself, at some point along the way. And when you can form those relationships, with students in elementary schools in a way that makes them believe that they can take the next step and the next step, then you begin to address it. So.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, Dr. Dunstan, go ahead if you'd like to respond.
This is excellent question. You know how to get the answer? Talk to the grandchildren generation. Ask them, how do you make this interesting incentive for you? I was sitting talking with Dr. Bernadine Lacey, and she was talking about her grandchild. And we're thinking about this generation that's coming up and the technologies that are available and their expertise with the technology. She's talking to her granddaughter, 8 years old, and the granddaughter told her that she was exasperating. Exasperating, and used it right in context. What I'm getting at, one way to get input as to how do we get you interested in science, how do we get your family to participate in genomics? One challenge might be to give the problem to the grandchildren generation. And I go to that generation because the closer you are to our generation, the more you're vested in the old mindset of how to do this. But they can answer the question, and they got answers to everything anyway, So let's even do a questionnaire to see what this different generation, we could do disparities in the age generation, right, and get information on the questions and just see how that impacts. But I'd love to see how this generation coming up now, how they would suggest solving the problems that we would have, just as ideas.
Well, thank you, folks. So I know the community panel discussion is incredibly rich and is going to flow throughout the rest of the afternoon, including the health disparities panel, and we'll continue your questions for that panel as well. So please join me in giving our community panel another round of applause. Thank you. I would learn so much when we have, thank you so much, of all the diverse perspectives up on the stage, and particularly grateful Dr. Dunster was able to stay for this. Thank you very much. So I'd now like to introduce someone who is no stranger to us and who's been very kind and generous with his time to join us today, and might I add, right on time as well. Governor John Carney has been working for Delawareans for more than 30 years. Graduate of St. Mark's High School, he attended Dartmouth College and earned MVP honors in football. He earned his master's in public administration right here from the University of Delaware. He has served as Delaware's Secretary of Finance and as Deputy Chief of Staff under then Governor Tom Carper. He has also served Newcastle County and as a staffer for then Senator Joe Biden. More recently, he was our Lieutenant Governor from 2001 to 2009, and following that until 2017, he was Delaware's representative in Congress for 3 terms, helping find jobs for veterans and preventing prescription drug shortages, among many other accomplishments. I want to make special mention of First Lady Tracy Quillen Carney. She's a fellow graduate of mine, both from high school and from college. I've known her for many years. She has herself championed health improvements in health disparities as well, especially around nutrition and food insecurity among Delaware children. In his previous role, John developed the Lieutenant Governor's Challenge to encourage us all to live healthier. And now, as governor, he focuses on all of Delaware's priorities, including the economy, the education, and as you heard this morning from the Lieutenant Governor, a healthier Delaware. Please join me in welcoming my friend and Delaware's own, Governor John Carney.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I'm not right on time. I'm a little bit late. Getting in and out of this part of Newark takes you longer than you think with the traffic. It is great to be here with all of you. I understand that I'm standing between you and your lunch. As I was walking in, I saw those brown bags waiting for you to pick them up. I'm really just here to do 2 things. One is to thank all of you for the great work that you're doing as part of this research grant, to talk a little bit about that. And 2 is to welcome our visitors and partners from other states. How many, do we have folks from South Carolina? We have some folks from South Carolina. 1? Just 1? Anybody else from South Carolina? 2? Sorry about the weather. As I was coming in, I noticed the snow clouds are gathering, and we're supposed to have snow tonight, so I hope you're getting on a plane and getting back south quickly because it looks like we're going to get another nor'easter. Last year, I think I talked to this group down at the Star campus, and we had a good event down there. It was, I think, appropriate that it was at the Star campus and we were on the former Chrysler site, because it's a reminder to me that how things have changed in our state and how increasingly science and technology, research and development is going to be important to our economy going forward. And over the last year, as I said, I spoke to you, I was about a month or 2 in as your new governor. Now I have a year's worth of experience as governor. And one of the things I've learned is something that the 4th graders at North Star Elementary taught me about 2 or 3 months into my tenure as governor. I was out there for a session where I was reading to the children. And after that, they had a whole series of questions for me. And they had one student that was put in charge, and she was sitting up front right next to me. And they had questions on the board that were next to where we were sitting. I didn't see them at the time, and so I was going around answering children. They had their hands up, and I would call on them. And the little girl sitting next to me said, "Governor, we have questions. They're on the board right next to you." And I said, I looked at the questions and I started jumping around because some of the questions were easier than other questions. And then she said, "Governor, could you take the questions one at a time?" It was very clear that this little girl was in charge. And the next question was one of the ones that I was avoiding, and it said, "What's the most important part of your job?" And here I was governor for a couple months, and I really hadn't given it that much thought. But after a year on the job, I'm pretty clear as to what my job is. I don't get to do many of the things that I used to do, where you're actually doing things. The governor doesn't really do much. Seriously, I mean, we don't, people are nodding, yeah, you don't do much, we know that. That's the reaction I get from most people. No, my job is to enable other people to do their jobs better. That's my job. And chief among them, the kind of the most important thing, if we think about all the things that are priorities for me as governor, for us as a state, is to create an environment, a climate where we can have a strong and growing economy. Because if people have jobs, good jobs, all the other stuff that we do kind of falls in place. Whether it's trying to improve our healthcare delivery system, address health disparities, all these things. If people have good jobs, everything else is a lot easier. And so I spend a lot of time on that. And again, we don't create jobs. As governor, I don't create jobs, but we create an environment where private business, universities, and other institutions create jobs. And that's why grants like this are so important. We've been getting grants from NIH and NSF now for about 10 or more years. I went first with David Weir down to meet with the folks at NSF about our first, what was called an EPSCoR grant. And it's a fancy name. Basically, it says for the states that don't get many research grants. That's what they're for. And the purpose of them is to help a state, its universities, its colleges, its institutions, develop research capacity and expertise, to develop a workforce that has that kind of experience. And that's what all of you are doing. At the same time, you're really solving difficult problems. I was looking at some of the things that you were talking about. I came in the middle of the panel where you're talking about health disparities, which is a really important priority for all of us. As I think about what it takes to grow our economy, it's going to be one where small business, entrepreneurial businesses, science-based businesses are going to be more important than ever before. I just was to a meeting at the National Governors Association, and the CEO of IBM said something that just knocked me right over. She said that children coming into school today, when they graduate, more than half of the jobs we don't even have today. So how do you prepare young people for jobs that you don't know what they're going to be? One is you know they're going to be based in science and technology. Two is you know you're going to have to prepare them for ways of doing exploration, ways of collaborating with folks, all the things that you're doing as part of this grant. And so this grant is really important for us as a state to build the science and research-based capacity that not only solves problems, which is what you're about doing, but also develops the capacity for us to do that so that we can compete as a state, bring in companies like Insight. I mean, Insight is doing some incredible things here in our state with new treatments for cancer, targeting their therapies for the specific genomics of an individual and all of that. I don't pretend to understand, but I was blown away when I saw it. 500 jobs with another 500 coming. That's the kind of thing that we have to cultivate in our state, and that's why all of you are so important, and this grant is so important. I was looking through some of the things that you were doing, and one that really struck me. It had to do with adapting a psychology class, I guess, here at the University of Delaware called The Art of Happiness. Now that's a class that we all need, the art of happiness. There was an article in the New York Times about a month ago about the most popular course at Yale University in the history of the university. And it was called The Psychology of the Good Life. The Psychology of the Good Life, and it could have been named The Art of Happiness. And all the students, all the young people were signing up because their lives were unhappy. They didn't know how to enjoy life. They were striving. They were thinking about their next achievement, their next thing, instead of enjoying life on a day-to-day basis. And I can't think of a better way to approach some of the health challenges that we face I was visiting an emergency room at one of our local hospitals. And the physician there, we were talking about the opioid crisis. And during the course of that, the emergency room physician said to me, about 50% of their visits are unnecessary. They're not emergencies. And she said, we know people they'll call in. We know who they are. And they're basically lonely or depressed or unhappy. They don't take their medicine, they don't do this, they don't follow the protocol. Many are our senior citizens. And so when you think about some of the approaches that all of you are taking to these challenges that we face in improving the quality of our healthcare delivery, we know we've got to bring our costs down, but improving quality as well. We pay more per person in the state of Delaware for healthcare than most states, but we don't get the results for our money. And so all the work that you're doing is really important for the future of our state. And I just want to thank you and encourage you. I know you're in the last, I think this is the last year of a 5-year grant, and there's an application in to extend it for another 5 years. This leverages about $25 million in federal resource to the state of Delaware, and the state puts up $1 million a year, and that's a really, really important investment. We do it in a number of NIH and NSF grants. To do just what you're doing here is to build capacity and to solve problems. So thank you very much, and those of you who are headed back to South Carolina, you better get on that plane quickly.
Well, thank you very much, Governor Carney, and wanted to share with you some good news from this morning that Dr. Stuart Pinder-McLeod, the principal investigator, shared that we have received a very optimistic score from the National Institutes of Health. They assure us that we're on the right track. So thank you and the state for all their support. So a couple of housekeeping issues as we head off to lunch. Lunch is outside with the brown bags. We're going to come back to the workshops, which are up on your screen. And one of the workshops will be here. For those folks on the other side of the room, beyond that horizontal pillar there, please make sure that you pick up your belongings, because that part will be cordoned off for another workshop. The evaluations, which all of you will receive in the workshop, please make sure you turn those in after the workshop. You'll get your tumbler, the ACCEL branded tumbler, on your way out. And your blue community needs assessment, please drop that off in one of the boxes outside. Again, thank you for a wonderful morning. Please join me in giving all of our participants from this morning a round of applause. Thank you. See you in the afternoon.